Hello everyone, welcome to the channel. Before we begin today's attack report, I want to ask you to subscribe to the channel. Your subscription is very important to us, so please subscribe. Also, write now in the comments which city you're watching from. We'd love to know. All of this because the excitement of our annual camping trip had been building for weeks, and as we loaded up the truck with our gear, the nervous energy was palpable. My friends, Matt, Cody, and Jess, had been planning this weekend getaway for months, determined to escape the monotony of our everyday lives and embrace the rugged beauty of the Appalachian wilderness. As we set off, the winding roads leading us deeper into the forest, I couldn't help but feel a sense of anticipation mingled with unease. The outside world seemed to fade away, replaced by an endless expanse of towering trees and untamed nature. The further we drove, the more my heart raced, the adrenaline coursing through my veins as I imagined the adventures that awaited us. When we finally reached our campsite, we worked quickly to set up our tents, eager to begin our weekend of freedom and exploration. Yet, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the forest floor, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The usual sounds of birds and small animals had given way to an eerie silence, and I couldn't help but glance nervously over my shoulder, as if expecting to see something lurking in the darkness. "Hey Jake, you all right?" Cody asked, his brow furrowed with concern. I forced a smile, not wanting to dampen the group's enthusiasm. Yeah, I'm fine. Just a little on edge, I guess. This place is a lot more remote than I remembered." Cody chuckled and slapped me on the back. "That's the whole point, man. We're getting away from it all, disconnecting from the real world. What could be better?" I nodded, trying to convince myself that he was right. As we gathered around the crackling campfire, sharing beers and swapping ghost stories, the unease slowly started to dissipate. The familiar voices of my friends and the warmth of the flames lulled me into a false sense of security, and I found myself relaxing, even beginning to enjoy the peaceful isolation of our wilderness retreat. But as the fire eventually burned down to glowing embers, the eerie silence of the forest crept back in, and I suddenly felt a chill run down my spine. The hair on the back of my neck stood on end, and I glanced around the campsite, my eyes straining to see into the inky blackness that surrounded us. "Hey, did you guys hear that?" I whispered, my voice barely audible above the crackling of the dying fire. Matt looked up, his brow furrowed. "Hear what?" I hesitated, listening intently, but the forest had fallen silent once more. I'm not sure. It sounded like a thud or something heavy moving out there." Jess chuckled nervously. "Great. Now you've got me all spooked, Jake. It's probably just a deer or something. Nothing to worry about." I nodded, but the unease refused to subside. As the minutes ticked by, the silence seemed to grow more oppressive, and I found myself straining to hear any sound that might indicate we were not alone. Suddenly, a bone-chilling howl pierced the air, making me jump in my seat. My heart pounded in my chest as I fumbled for my flashlight, the beam of light cutting through the darkness. "What the hell was that?" Cody exclaimed, his eyes wide with fear. I shook my head, my mouth suddenly dry. I don't know, but we need to get back to the tents now." Without a moment's hesitation, we scrambled to our feet, stumbling through the darkness towards the safety of our shelters. I could feel the adrenaline coursing through my veins, my senses heightened as I scanned the area, terrified of what I might see. As I reached the entrance to my tent, a movement in the shadows caught my eye, and I froze, the beam of my flashlight cutting through the gloom. What I saw next I will never be able to unsee. A massive, hulking figure, easily 8 feet tall, emerged from the trees, its glowing red eyes fixed on me. Thick, matted fur covered its body, and its massive clawed hands hung at its sides, ready to strike. It let out a deafening roar that shook the very ground beneath my feet, and in that moment, I knew I was facing something far beyond the realm of normal, something primal and terrifying. I stumbled backwards, my heart pounding in my ears as I tried to make sense of what I was seeing. This couldn't be real. It had to be some kind of nightmare. But the creature's guttural snarl and the overwhelming stench of its foul breath told me otherwise. Without thinking, I turned and ran, my legs pumping as fast as they could carry me. I could hear the creature crashing through the underbrush behind me, its heavy footfalls shaking the ground. I didn't dare look back, focused only on getting as far away as possible from the savage beast that had invaded our peaceful campsite. As I ran, my mind raced, trying to make sense of what had just happened. What was that thing, and how could it be real? The rational part of my brain insisted that it couldn't be Bigfoot, that such a creature couldn't possibly exist. But the memory of its glowing eyes and the sheer terror I had felt in its presence told a different story. I ran until my lungs burned, until my legs felt like they might give out beneath me. Finally, I stumbled to a stop, collapsing to the ground as I struggled to catch my breath. Leaning against a nearby tree, I stared out into the darkness, half expecting to see the hulking figure of the creature emerge once more. But the forest was silent, save for the pounding of my own heart. I sat there, shaking, my mind racing with 1,000 questions. What had I just encountered? And more importantly, would I ever be able to convince anyone that it was real? I've always been a light sleeper, but that night in the Appalachian wilderness, every little sound seemed amplified. The rustling of leaves, the creaking of branches, even the gentle whisper of the wind. They all conspired to keep me teetering on the edge of consciousness. But it wasn't until the dead of night that true terror found me. Thud. The sound jolted me awake, my heart instantly racing. It wasn't like anything I'd heard before. Not an animal, not a falling branch. No, this was something heavy, deliberate. My mind flashed back to the unsettling feeling I'd had earlier around the campfire, that sense of being watched. I lay there, frozen, straining my ears. Seconds stretched into an eternity of silence. Then, another thud. Closer this time. "Matt?" I whispered, hoping my friend in the adjacent tent was awake. No response. My hand trembled as I reached for the zipper of my sleeping bag. The nylon made a deafening sound in the silence as I extricated myself. I crawled toward the tent flap, every fiber of my being screaming at me to stay put, to hide. But I had to know. With shaking fingers, I grasped the zipper of the tent flap. I hesitated, took a deep breath, and slowly, agonizingly, began to open it. The inky blackness of the forest greeted me. The moon, so bright earlier, was now hidden behind thick clouds. I squinted, willing my eyes to adjust, to make sense of the shapes in the darkness. Nothing moved. Nothing made a sound. I let out a shaky breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Maybe it was just my imagination. Maybe. A bone-chilling howl shattered the night. I recoiled, nearly falling backward into my tent. My blood turned to ice in my veins. That sound, it wasn't a wolf. Wasn't a coyote. It was something wrong, primal, terrifying. "Guys," I hissed urgently, "wake up." No response from the other tents. How could they sleep through this? My fingers scrabbled frantically for my flashlight. I needed to see, needed to make sense of what was happening. The plastic was slick with my sweat as I finally grasped it. Click. The beam cut through the darkness, and for a split second, I wished I had never turned it on. There, not 20 yards from our campsite, was a shape. A massive, hulking shape, easily 8 feet tall. It was covered in thick, matted fur, and as my light hit it, it turned. Red eyes, glowing, hate-filled red eyes locked onto mine. A scream caught in my throat as the creature let out a roar that shook the very ground. The sound was deafening, inhuman, filled with rage and hunger. "Holy shit!" I heard Cody's voice from another tent. "What the fuck is that?" The creature took a lumbering step forward, and I scrambled out of my tent, abandoning everything but the flashlight in my hand. "Run!" I screamed. "Everybody run!" I heard the frantic sounds of my friends emerging from their tents, their confused shouts turning to screams of terror as they saw what I saw. The creature, and I knew with a certainty that defied all logic that this was Bigfoot, charged. Its massive arms swung, clearing a path through the underbrush as if it were nothing more than cobwebs. I ran. I ran harder and faster than I ever had in my life. Branches whipped at my face, roots threatened to trip me at every step, but I didn't slow down. I couldn't. The sound of the creature's pursuit filled my ears, growing closer with each passing second. "Jake!" I heard Jess scream from somewhere to my left. "Help!" I wanted to turn, to go to her, but my body wouldn't obey. Primal fear had taken over, driving me forward, away from the monster behind us. A scream pierced the air, Jess's scream cut short with a sickening finality. "No!" I heard Matt yell. "Jess!" The sound of breaking branches and a meaty thud told me Matt had likely tried to go back for her. I forced myself to keep running, tears streaking down my face. I don't know how long I ran. Time lost all meaning in that nightmare sprint through the dark forest. My lungs burned, my legs screamed in protest, but I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. Finally, I burst through the tree line onto the gravel road where we had parked our truck. I collapsed, gasping for air, my whole body shaking uncontrollably. "Cody?" I called out weakly. "Matt? Jess?" Silence answered me. I don't know how long I lay there on the cold gravel, torn between the need to go back for my friends and the paralyzing fear of what awaited in those dark woods. Eventually, I heard the crunch of footsteps on gravel. "Jake?" It was Cody's voice, raw and trembling. "Jake, is that you?" I pushed myself up, relief flooding through me. "Cody, thank God. Where are the others?" Cody stumbled into view, his face pale and streaked with dirt and tears. "I don't know. I just ran. I heard Jess scream and then..." He trailed off, his eyes haunted. We sat there in silence for a long moment, the reality of what had just happened slowly sinking in. "What was that thing, Jake?" Cody finally asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I shook my head. I don't know. It couldn't be. I mean, it's impossible, right? But we both knew what we had seen, what had chased us, what had likely killed our friends. "We need to get help," I said, forcing myself to stand on shaky legs. "We need to go back for Matt and Jess." Cody nodded, but I could see the fear in his eyes, the same fear that was coursing through my veins. As we made our way to the truck, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were still being watched, that somewhere in the dark forest behind us, a pair of glowing red eyes were following our every move. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to my core, that this nightmare was far from over. The weight of dread settled in my stomach as I fumbled with the flashlight, its beam casting eerie shadows across the forest floor. My heart pounded so loudly I was sure it would give away my position to the monstrous creature lurking in the darkness. I took a tentative step backward, desperate to put some distance between myself and those glowing red eyes that seemed to pierce right through me. "Jake!" Cody's panicked voice cut through the night. "We need to go. Now!" I turned to run, but in my haste I stumbled over an exposed tree root. The world tilted sideways as I fell, my flashlight flying from my grip and clattering against a nearby rock. The beam flickered and died, plunging me into near-total darkness. "Shit!" I cursed, scrambling to my feet. But before I could regain my balance, a deafening roar shook the very air around me. The creature was upon me in an instant. I felt more than saw the massive shape hurtling towards me. In a desperate attempt to protect myself, I threw my arms up just as a powerful, fur-covered limb slammed into my chest. The impact knocked the wind out of me and sent me flying backward. I crashed into a tree trunk, pain exploding across my back. Gasping for air, I struggled to focus my vision in the dim moonlight. The silhouette of the beast loomed over me, its massive frame blocking out what little light filtered through the canopy. The stench of rotting meat and wet fur assaulted my nostrils, making me gag. "Please," I wheezed, though I knew it was futile. This wasn't some person in a costume, some sick prank gone too far. This was something primal, something that defied explanation, and it wanted to hurt me. As if in response to my plea, the creature let out another ear-splitting roar. I could feel its hot, fetid breath on my face. In that moment, a strange calm washed over me. I was going to die here, in this God-forsaken forest, torn apart by something that shouldn't exist. But then, survival instinct kicked in. With strength born of pure terror, I rolled to the side, just as the creature's massive hand came crashing down, where my head had been a split second before. I heard the crunch of splintering wood as its claws gouged deep furrows in the tree trunk. I scrambled to my feet, ignoring the screaming pain in my back and chest. I had to run, had to get away. But which way? In the darkness and confusion, I had lost all sense of direction. A flash of movement to my left made the decision for me. I bolted to the right, crashing through underbrush, branches whipping at my face and arms. I could hear the creature behind me, its heavy footfalls shaking the ground as it gave chase. "Help!" I screamed, though I knew it was useless. We were miles from anywhere, and the only people who could hear me were probably already dead. "Somebody, please!" I risked a glance over my shoulder and immediately wished I hadn't. The creature was gaining on me, its long arms reaching out, claws glinting in the moonlight. I pushed myself harder, my lungs burning, legs pumping furiously, but I was no match for the beast's inhuman speed and strength. I felt a searing pain across my back as its claws raked through my shirt and into my flesh. The force of the blow sent me tumbling to the ground. I rolled onto my back, facing my attacker. The creature loomed over me, its massive frame silhouetted against the night sky. Those red eyes burned with an otherworldly hunger that chilled me to my core. "No, please," I whimpered, raising my arms in a futile attempt to protect myself. The creature's response was swift and brutal. It grabbed me by the leg, its grip like an iron vise. I screamed in agony as I felt bones crunch under the immense pressure. With seemingly no effort, it lifted me off the ground and slammed me back down. Stars exploded behind my eyes as my head connected with the hard forest floor. Through the haze of pain, I could hear the creature's heavy breathing, could feel its hot breath on my skin. I lashed out blindly, my fist connecting with something solid. The creature let out a grunt, the first sound I'd heard from it that wasn't a roar, and loosened its grip slightly. It was enough for me to wrench my mangled leg free. Ignoring the excruciating pain, I dragged myself backward, hands scrabbling in the dirt for anything I could use as a weapon. My fingers closed around a thick branch and I swung it with all my remaining strength. The branch connected with the side of the creature's head with a satisfying thud. It staggered back, shaking its massive head as if dazed. For a moment, hope flared in my chest. Maybe I could fight this thing off. Maybe I could survive this nightmare. But then those red eyes locked onto me again, and I saw something new in them. Rage. Pure, unadulterated fury. The creature's mouth opened in a roar that seemed to shake the very trees around us. Before I could react, it was on me again. Its enormous hand wrapped around my throat, lifting me off the ground as if I weighed nothing. I clawed at its arm, gasping for air, but it was like trying to fight a mountain. The world started to go dark around the edges as the creature squeezed tighter. This was it, I thought. This is how I die. But then, inexplicably, the pressure on my throat eased. The creature cocked its head to the side as if listening to something. A moment later, I heard it too. Voices in the distance, calling out, "Jake! Cody! Where are you guys?" It was Matt's voice. He was alive. The creature's head swiveled towards the sound, its grip on me loosening further. Taking advantage of its distraction, I brought my knee up as hard as I could, catching the beast in what I hoped was a sensitive area. To my amazement, it worked. The creature dropped me and stumbled back, letting out a pained growl. I hit the ground hard, the impact sending fresh waves of agony through my battered body. "Here!" I tried to shout, but it came out as more of a strangled croak. "We're over here!" The creature's head snapped back towards me, those terrible red eyes boring into mine. For a moment, I was sure it was going to finish what it had started. But then, to my utter disbelief, it turned and lumbered off into the darkness. I lay there, gasping for air, my entire body throbbing with pain. I couldn't believe I was still alive. The sound of approaching footsteps filled me with both relief and dread. What if the creature came back? What if it went after Matt instead? Jake? Matt's voice was closer now. Oh my God, Jake! I saw the beam of a flashlight cutting through the trees, and then Matt was there, kneeling beside me. His face was pale, streaked with dirt and what looked like blood. Jesus Christ, what happened to you? He asked, his eyes wide as he took in my battered state. I opened my mouth to answer, but no words came out. How could I possibly explain what had just happened? Would he even believe me? We need to get out of here, I managed to croak. It might come back. Matt's brow furrowed in confusion. What might come back? Jake, what are you talking about? But before I could answer, a bone-chilling howl echoed through the forest. Matt's head snapped up, his face draining of what little color it had left. What the hell was that? He whispered. I grabbed his arm with what little strength I had left. We need to go. Now. As Matt helped me to my feet, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Somewhere out there in the darkness, I knew. Those glowing red eyes were still fixed on us. The forest floor was cold and damp beneath me as I lay there, choking back sobs that threatened to overwhelm me. The searing pain in my leg was unlike anything I'd ever experienced before. I could feel the warm, sticky blood seeping through my fingers as I desperately tried to stanch the flow. Help, I croaked, my voice barely above a whisper. Someone, please. But I knew no one could hear me. The creature's attack had left me far from our campsite, alone in the dark wilderness. The realization of my isolation hit me like a physical blow, and for a moment, I considered giving up. It would be so easy to just close my eyes and let the darkness take me. No, I couldn't give up. I had to get back to the camp, to safety, to my friends. With a groan of agony, I rolled onto my stomach. Every movement sent fresh waves of pain coursing through my body, but I gritted my teeth and began to drag myself forward. The ground was rough, littered with rocks and roots that tore at my already battered body. But I kept going, inch by excruciating inch. Time lost all meaning as I crawled through the forest. It could have been minutes or hours, I had no way of knowing. My world had narrowed to the space directly in front of me and the overwhelming need to keep moving. Just when I thought I couldn't go on any longer, I spotted a faint glow through the trees. The embers of our campfire. A surge of hope gave me renewed strength and I redoubled my efforts. Help! I called out, my voice stronger now. I'm here. Help me. As I broke through the tree line into our campsite, I saw movement near the tents. My friends were emerging, looks of confusion on their faces as they peered into the darkness. Jake? Matt's voice called out. Is that you? Here, I rasped, collapsing onto the ground. I'm here. The beam of a flashlight cut through the night, illuminating my battered form. I heard gasps of shock and horror. Oh my God, Jess breathed. What happened to you? They rushed to my side, their faces pale with shock as they took in my injuries. Cody knelt beside me, his hands hovering uncertainly over my mangled leg. Jesus Christ, Jake, he muttered. What did this to you? I opened my mouth to respond, but the words caught in my throat. How could I possibly explain what had happened? The memory of the attack was too fresh, too terrifying to put into words. I don't... I stammered, my breath coming in short gasps. It's okay, Jake, Matt said, placing a hand on my shoulder. You don't have to talk about it right now. We need to get you help. As they worked to tend to my wounds using what little first aid supplies we had, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig in the surrounding forest made me flinch. Was the creature still out there? Was it waiting for another opportunity to attack? We need to get out of here, I said urgently, grabbing Matt's arm. It's not safe. We have to leave now. Jake, calm down, Jess said soothingly. You're in shock. We can't move you like this. We need to call for help." "No," I shouted, startling them. "You don't understand. It's still out there. It could come back any minute." They exchanged worried glances, clearly thinking I was delirious from pain and blood loss. "What's out there, Jake?" Cody asked gently. "What did this to you?" I took a deep breath, knowing how insane I was about to sound. It was Bigfoot. The silence that followed was deafening. I could see the disbelief in their eyes mixed with concern for my mental state. "Jake," Matt said slowly, "there's no such thing as Bigfoot. You must have been attacked by a bear or—" "It wasn't a fucking bear," I snapped, my fear turning to anger at their disbelief. "I know what I saw. It was massive, covered in fur, with glowing red eyes. It picked me up like I was nothing and—" My voice trailed off as the memory of the attack overwhelmed me. I could still feel the creature's hot breath on my face, still hear its bone-chilling roar. Okay, Jess said, trying to calm me down. "Whatever it was, you're safe now. We're going to get you help, all right?" As they continued to tend to my wounds and discuss how to get me out of the forest, I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that had settled over me. They didn't believe me. How could they? If I hadn't experienced it myself, I wouldn't have believed it either. But I knew the truth. And I knew that as long as we stayed in this forest, none of us were safe. A twig snapped in the darkness beyond our campsite, and I jerked my head towards the sound. For a split second, I thought I saw a pair of glowing red eyes watching us from the shadows. But when I blinked, they were gone. "We need to leave," I whispered, my voice trembling. "Now." As my friends prepared to move me, I couldn't help but wonder if we were already too late. Was the creature out there right now, watching and waiting for the perfect moment to strike again? And if it did, would any of us make it out of this forest? The pain was excruciating as Matt and Cody helped me to my feet. I bit down hard on my lip, tasting blood, trying not to scream. My mangled leg threatened to give way beneath me, and I leaned heavily on my friends. "Easy, Jake," Matt said, his voice strained. "We've got you." Jess hovered nearby, her face pale with worry. "Are you sure we should move him? What if we make it worse?" "We don't have a choice," and I gasped through gritted teeth. "When we have to get out of here now." The urgency in my voice seemed to galvanize them into action. As Cody supported me, Matt and Jess rushed to break down the camp. I watched them work, my eyes constantly darting to the tree line, searching for any sign of the creature's return. "Hurry," I urged, my voice barely above a whisper. "Please, hurry." They worked with frantic efficiency, stuffing sleeping bags into backpacks and collapsing tents. In what felt like both an eternity and mere seconds, our campsite was dismantled. "Okay, let's go," Matt said, slinging a pack over his shoulder. "Cody, you help Jake. Jess and I will carry the rest." The trek back to our truck was agonizing. Every step sent shockwaves of pain through my body, and more than once I nearly passed out. But the fear of what might be lurking in the forest kept me going. As we neared the road where we'd parked, a twig snapped in the darkness behind us. I whirled around, nearly falling in the process, my heart pounding. "What is it?" Cody asked, tightening his grip on me. I squinted into the gloom, searching for those glowing red eyes. But there was nothing, just shadows and trees. Nothing," I stammered. "Let's just go." Finally, we reached the truck. Matt and Jess threw our gear in the back while Cody helped me into the passenger seat. As Matt started the engine, I caught one last glimpse of the forest through the rearview mirror. For a split second, I thought I saw a massive, shadowy figure watching us from between the trees, but then we were moving, and the forest faded into the night behind us. The drive back to civilization was a blur. My mind kept replaying the attack, the creature's roar echoing in my ears. I must have been mumbling or making noises because Jess, sitting behind me, kept reaching forward to squeeze my shoulder. "It's okay, Jake," she'd say. "We're almost there. You're safe now." But I didn't feel safe. How could I, knowing what was out there? The bright lights of the hospital emergency room were jarring after the darkness of the forest. Everything happened in a rush. Nurses asking questions, doctors examining my wounds, the sting of an IV being inserted. "What happened to him?" I heard a doctor ask my friends. "We don't know exactly," Matt replied. "We found him like this at our campsite. He says it was Bigfoot." There was a pause, and I could imagine the look the doctor was giving them. "I see," he said finally. "Well, let's focus on treating these injuries for now." As they wheeled me away for X-rays and further examination, I tried to tell them what had happened. But the words sounded insane even to my own ears. "You don't understand," I insisted to a nurse as she cleaned my wounds. "It was huge, covered in fur. It picked me up like I weighed nothing." "Shh, it's okay," she soothed. "You're safe now. Try to relax." But I couldn't relax. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those glowing red orbs staring back at me. Hours later, I lay in a hospital bed, my body a patchwork of bandages and stitches. The doctors had been baffled by my injuries. Claw marks too large for any known animal in the area. Bite marks that didn't match any local predator. "These injuries are unusual," the lead doctor had said, frowning at my charts. "You're lucky to be alive, Mr. Thompson." Lucky? Is that what I was? As I lay there, the pain dulled by morphine, I didn't feel lucky. I felt haunted. My friends came to visit, their faces etched with concern. "How are you feeling?" Jess asked, taking my hand. "Like I got mauled by Bigfoot," I replied, attempting a weak smile. They exchanged glances and I knew what they were thinking. "Look, Jake," Matt began hesitantly. "About what happened." "You don't believe me," I said flatly. "It's not that," Cody interjected. "It's just, Bigfoot? Are you sure it wasn't a bear, or—" "I know what I saw," I snapped, then immediately regretted my tone. "I'm sorry. I know it sounds crazy, but I swear to you, it wasn't a bear. It wasn't anything I've ever seen before." An uncomfortable silence fell over the room. Finally, Jess spoke up. "Whatever it was, you're safe now," she said softly. "That's what matters." But as they left and the room grew quiet, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't safe at all. The creature was still out there, somewhere in those dark woods. And deep down, I knew with terrifying certainty that this wasn't over. As I drifted off into a fitful sleep, my mind clouded by painkillers and exhaustion, I could have sworn I heard a distant bone-chilling howl, a sound that made my blood run cold and sent shivers down my spine, a sound that told me the nightmare was far from over. The sterile hospital room felt suffocating as I sat up in bed, my body a patchwork of bandages and stitches. My friends, Matt, Cody, and Jess, gathered around me, their faces etched with a mix of concern and something else, doubt. I took a deep breath, wincing at the pain in my ribs. "I know you all have questions about what happened," I began, my voice hoarse. "I'm ready to tell you everything." They exchanged glances, and Matt nodded encouragingly. "We're listening, Jake. Just take your time." I closed my eyes, the memories of that night flooding back with terrifying clarity. We were in our tents when I heard it. This sound, not like any animal I've ever heard before. When I went to check, I shuddered, reliving the moment. That's when I saw it. Bigfoot. The word hung in the air, heavy with disbelief. Cody was the first to speak. "Jake, man, are you sure? I mean, Bigfoot? That's impossible?" I finished for him, a bitter edge to my voice. "Yeah, I know how it sounds, but I'm telling you it was real. Massive, covered in fur, with these glowing red eyes." Jess reached out, placing a gentle hand on my arm. "Jake, you were badly hurt. You lost a lot of blood. Isn't it possible that maybe you were hallucinating?" I jerked my arm away, instantly regretting the movement as pain shot through my body. "Hallucinating? Look at me." I gestured to my injuries. "You think I did this to myself?" "Of course not," Matt interjected, trying to calm the situation. "But Jake, Bigfoot isn't real. It's a myth, a legend. There has to be another explanation. I felt a surge of frustration and desperation. Then what was it? What else could have done this to me? They fell silent, unable to provide an answer. Maybe it was a bear, Cody suggested weakly. I shook my head vehemently. It wasn't a bear. It stood on two legs. It had hands, not paws, and its eyes. I trailed off, the memory of those glowing red orbs sending a chill down my spine. "Jake," Jess said softly, "we want to believe you. We do. But you have to understand how this sounds." I looked at each of them in turn, searching for any sign of belief, any willingness to accept what I was telling them. But all I saw was doubt and concern, not for the truth of my story, but for my mental state. "You think I'm crazy?" I said flatly. No, Matt hurried to assure me. "We're just concerned. You've been through a traumatic experience. It's natural for your mind to try to make sense of it, even if that means inventing a mythical creature," I finished bitterly. The conversation was interrupted by a knock at the door. Two men in police uniforms entered, followed by a doctor. "Mr. Thompson?" one of the officers said. "I'm Officer Brennan. This is my partner, Officer Chen. We'd like to ask you a few questions about the incident in the forest, if you're feeling up to it." I nodded, a flicker of hope igniting in my chest. Maybe they would believe me. Maybe they had found evidence. But as I recounted my story once again, I saw the same looks of disbelief and skepticism cross their faces. "Mr. Thompson," Officer Chen said when I'd finished, "I understand you've been through a traumatic experience, but are you sure about what you saw? Bigfoot sightings are, well, they're not exactly credible." "I know what I saw," I insisted, my voice rising. "It was real. It attacked me. How else do you explain my injuries?" The doctor stepped forward. "Mr. Thompson's injuries are severe and unusual," he admitted, "but they're consistent with an animal attack. Possibly a bear, though some aspects are puzzling." "Puzzling how?" I pressed. The doctor hesitated. "Well, the size and pattern of the claw marks are larger than what we typically see with bear attacks, and the bite marks, they don't quite match any known predator in the area." For a moment I felt vindicated, but then Officer Brennan spoke up. "Regardless of the specifics of the attack, Mr. Thompson, we can't file a report about a Bigfoot sighting. It's simply not, well, it's not a real thing we can investigate." I felt the last shred of hope drain away. "So that's it? You're just going to dismiss everything I've said?" "We're not dismissing your experience," Officer Chen said gently. "We understand you were attacked by something. We'll continue to investigate, but you think I'm delusional," I finished. The room fell into an uncomfortable silence. I looked around at the faces surrounding me, my friends, the police officers, the doctor. Not one of them believed me. The truth of what had happened that night in the forest, the terror, the pain, the certainty of what I had seen, it was mine alone to bear. As they filed out of the room, murmuring platitudes and promises to look into it, I felt a profound sense of isolation settle over me. The memory of the attack was seared into my mind, the creature's roar, its impossible strength, those glowing red eyes. But without anyone to believe me, without any concrete evidence, it might as well have been a nightmare. I sank back into the hospital bed, wincing at the pain that seemed to radiate from every part of my body. Physical reminders of an encounter that, according to everyone else, couldn't possibly have happened. As I closed my eyes, trying to shut out the world that refused to believe me, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over. Somewhere out there, in the dark depths of the forest, that creature was still lurking, and I was the only one who knew the truth. The darkness of my bedroom felt oppressive, closing in around me like a shroud. I lay there, wide awake, afraid to close my eyes, because I knew what awaited me in my dreams. It had been a week since I was released from the hospital, my body still a patchwork of healing wounds and fading bruises. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the mental anguish that plagued me every night. As exhaustion finally overcame my fear, I felt myself drifting off. And then, like clockwork, the nightmare began. I was back in the forest, the moonlight casting eerie shadows through the trees. The silence was deafening, broken only by the sound of my ragged breathing and pounding heart. I knew it was out there, hunting me. A twig snapped behind me and I spun around. There it was. The creature, its massive form silhouetted against the darkness. Those glowing red eyes locked onto mine, filled with a primal hunger that sent chills down my spine. I ran, crashing through the underbrush, branches whipping at my face. But no matter how fast I moved, I could hear it getting closer. Its hot, fetid breath on the back of my neck, its growls growing louder with each passing second. Just as its claws were about to close around me, I jerked awake with a strangled cry. My shirt was soaked with sweat, and my leg throbbed with a phantom pain, as if my body was reliving the attack. I fumbled for the lamp on my bedside table, desperate to banish the darkness. As light flooded the room, I tried to calm my racing heart, reminding myself that I was safe, that it was just a dream. But was it? The memory of that night in the forest felt so real, so vivid. How could I be sure where reality ended and nightmare began? A soft knock on my door made me jump. "Jake?" It was my roommate, Matt. "You okay in there? I heard you yelling." I took a deep breath, trying to steady my voice. "Yeah, I'm fine. Just a bad dream." There was a pause, then the sound of the door opening. Matt stood there, concern etched on his face. "Another one? That's the third time this week, man." I nodded, unable to meet his eyes. "I know. I'm sorry if I woke you." Matt came into the room, sitting on the edge of my bed. "Don't apologize. I'm worried about you, Jake. We all are." I knew who he meant by we. Our friends, Cody and Jess. They had been walking on eggshells around me ever since the incident, their disbelief in my story of the Bigfoot attack barely concealed behind their concern for my well-being. "I'm fine," I insisted, even as my hands shook slightly. It's going to take some time to process everything, you know?" Matt nodded, but I could see the doubt in his eyes. "Have you thought about talking to someone? A professional, I mean? It might help to—" "No." I cut him off, more sharply than I intended. The mere thought of trying to explain what had happened to a stranger, of seeing that same look of disbelief and concern, made my chest tighten with anxiety. "I don't need a shrink. I just need time." Matt held up his hands in a placating gesture. Okay, it was just a suggestion. But Jake, you can't keep going on like this. These nightmares, the panic attacks. It's not healthy, man." I knew he was right. The lack of sleep was taking its toll, dark circles forming under my eyes, my nerves constantly on edge. But how could I explain that the nightmares were more than just dreams? That every time I closed my eyes, I was back in that forest, face to face with a creature that shouldn't exist? "I know," I said softly. "I'm trying, Matt. I really am." He reached out, squeezing my shoulder gently. "We're here for you, buddy. Whatever you need." As he left the room, closing the door behind him, I felt a wave of guilt wash over me. My friends were trying so hard to help, to understand. But how could they, when I could barely understand it myself? I lay back down, staring at the ceiling. Sleep was out of the question now. My mind raced, replaying the attack over and over. The creature's roar, its impossible strength, those glowing red eyes. For a moment, I allowed myself to consider the possibility that Matt and the others were right. That maybe, just maybe, it had all been a hallucination, a product of fear and trauma, my mind creating a monster to explain an attack by a more mundane predator. But then I looked down at my leg, at the scars that were still healing. The doctor's words echoed in my mind. The size and pattern of the claw marks are larger than what we typically see with bear attacks, and the bite marks, they don't quite match any known predator in the area. No, it had been real. I knew it with a certainty that went beyond logic or reason. The creature, Bigfoot, Sasquatch, whatever you wanted to call it, was out there, and deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that our encounter wasn't over. As the first light of dawn began to creep through my window, I made a decision. I couldn't live like this anymore, jumping at shadows, doubting my own sanity. I needed answers. I needed proof. I reached for my laptop, opening it with shaking hands. If no one would believe me, I'd have to find the truth on my own. As I began to type Bigfoot sightings into the search bar, I felt a mix of determination and dread settle in my stomach. Whatever it took, I would find the answers I needed. I would prove that the creature was real, that my experience wasn't just a nightmare or a delusion, and maybe, just maybe, I could finally put this terror to rest. The soft glow of my computer screen illuminated the darkness of my room, casting eerie shadows on the walls. It was 3 a.m., but sleep was a distant memory. My eyes burned from hours of staring at the screen, but I couldn't stop. I had to find something, anything that would prove I wasn't crazy. Weeks had passed since the attack, but the memory of that night in the forest haunted me every moment. The creature's roar, its impossible strength, those glowing red eyes. I couldn't shake the images from my mind. And so, I searched. My browser history had become a testament to my growing obsession. Bigfoot sightings, Sasquatch evidence, cryptid attacks in North America. The list went on and on. I had joined online forums, pored over grainy photographs, and listened to countless eyewitness accounts. But nothing came close to what I had experienced. A knock on my door startled me from my research trance. "Jake?" It was Matt, his voice muffled through the door. "You still up, man?" I quickly minimized my browser windows. "Yeah, come in." Matt entered, rubbing sleep from his eyes. His gaze fell on my cluttered desk, covered in printouts of alleged Bigfoot sightings and maps of the local forests. "Jesus, Jake," he sighed. "Have you slept at all?" I shrugged, avoiding his concerned gaze. "I'm fine, just doing some research." Matt picked up one of the papers, a blurry image of what could have been a large, hairy creature, or just a bear standing on its hind legs. "This again? Jake, we've talked about this. You need to let it go." Anger flared in my chest. "Let it go? How am I supposed to let it go when no one believes me? When everyone thinks I'm crazy?" "We don't think you're crazy," Matt said softly. "We're just worried about you. This obsession, it's not healthy." I stood up abruptly, ignoring the protest of my still healing leg. "It's not an obsession, it's the truth. That thing was real, Matt. It attacked me, and I'm going to prove it." Matt held up his hands in a placating gesture. Okay. But maybe you could take a break? Come out with us tomorrow. Jess and Cody are worried about you too." I felt a pang of guilt. I had been pushing my friends away, too consumed by my search for answers. But how could I explain that every moment not spent searching felt like a betrayal of the truth? "I'll think about it," I said finally. After Matt left, I turned back to my computer. A new email notification caught my eye. It was from a local news website I had contacted weeks ago asking for any information on unusual animal sightings or attacks in the area. My heart raced as I opened the email. Inside was a link to a recently published article, "Strange Tracks Found in Willow Creek Forest." I clicked the link, my hands shaking with anticipation. The article described how a local hiker had stumbled upon a set of large, unidentified footprints deep in the forest, the same forest where I had been attacked. The prints, measuring nearly 16 inches in length, do not match any known wildlife in the area, the article read. Local authorities are investigating but have no explanation at this time. My mind was reeling. This was it. The first piece of concrete evidence that something unusual was in those woods. I wanted to rush out there immediately, to see the prints for myself, to finally have proof that I wasn't crazy. But even as the thought crossed my mind, I remembered the terror of that night. The creature's roar, its massive form looming over me. No, I couldn't go back there. Not yet. Not alone. Instead, I printed out the article, adding it to my growing collection of evidence. I pulled out a map of Willow Creek Forest, marking the location where the tracks had been found. It wasn't far from where I had been attacked. As the first light of dawn began to creep through my window, I sat back, surveying my work. The wall above my desk had become a mosaic of maps, articles, and photos, all connected with red string like something out of a detective movie. I knew how it must look to others. Obsessive, unhinged even, but I couldn't stop. Every new piece of information, no matter how small, felt like a step closer to the truth. My phone buzzed. A text from Jess. "We're worried about you, Jake. Please come out with us today, just for a little while." I stared at the message, torn between my need to continue my research and the guilt of pushing away the people who cared about me. Maybe a break would do me good, clear my head, and who knows, maybe I could subtly ask around, see if anyone else had heard about strange sightings in the woods. "Okay," I texted back. "I'll meet you guys for lunch." As I got ready to leave, I cast one last glance at my wall of evidence. The article about the footprints seemed to stand out, calling to me. I knew I should feel excited about this potential breakthrough, but instead, a sense of unease settled in the pit of my stomach. If there really was evidence of the creature out there in the forest, what did that mean? Was it still in the area? Was anyone else in danger? And more importantly, what would I do if I actually found the proof I was looking for? As I closed the door to my room, leaving my obsession behind for a few hours, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was standing on the edge of something much bigger and more dangerous than I could have ever imagined. The truth was out there, waiting to be discovered, and I was determined to find it no matter the cost. The nightmare gripped me with terrifying intensity. Once again, I found myself in the depths of the forest, my heart pounding in my chest. The air was thick with an eerie silence, broken only by the sound of my labored breathing and the crunch of leaves beneath my feet. I stumbled forward, my injured leg throbbing with phantom pain. Suddenly, something caught my eye. There, in the soft earth, was a set of massive footprints. My breath hitched as I knelt to examine them, my hand hovering over the impression. They were enormous, easily twice the size of my own foot, with distinct toe marks that sent a chill down my spine. "This can't be real," I whispered to myself, but I knew deep down that it was. These were the tracks of the creature that had attacked me. Despite every instinct screaming at me to turn back, I found myself following the trail. The ground seemed to tremble beneath my feet with each step I took, as if the forest itself was warning me of the danger that lay ahead. Fear and exhilaration warred within me. I was terrified of encountering the creature again, but a part of me desperately needed proof that I wasn't crazy, that what I had experienced was real. As I pushed deeper into the forest, a powerful, musky stench filled the air. It was a smell I recognized instantly, one that had haunted my memories since that fateful night. My heart began to race even faster, adrenaline coursing through my veins. That's when I saw it. A hulking, hairy figure darting between the trees ahead of me. It moved with an impossible speed for its size, weaving through the dense foliage as if it were nothing more than a gentle breeze. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. Time seemed to stand still as the creature slowly turned towards me. Our eyes locked, and I found myself once again staring into those glowing red orbs that had haunted my nightmares. They were filled with a primal intelligence and a hunger that sent shivers down my spine. For a moment, neither of us moved. I could hear my heart thundering in my ears, feel the cold sweat breaking out across my skin. Then, without warning, the Bigfoot let out a deafening roar that shook the very trees around us. It charged towards me with frightening speed, its massive arms outstretched as if to grab me. I turned and ran, panic giving me strength I didn't know I possessed. Branches whipped at my face as I crashed through the underbrush, the creature's heavy footfalls right behind me. The world blurred around me as I ran, memories of the previous attack flashing through my mind. The pain, the terror, the certainty that I was going to die. It all came flooding back, spurring me to run faster. I could feel the creature's hot breath on the back of my neck, hear its guttural growls growing louder with each passing second. Just as I felt its claws about to close around me, I woke up with a strangled gasp, bolting upright in my bed. My shirt was soaked with sweat, and I could feel my heart racing as if I had actually been running for my life. It took me several moments to realize that I was safe in my room, that it had all been a dream, but it had felt so real. The footprints, the smell, those glowing red eyes, every detail was vivid, as if I had actually been back in that forest. I fumbled for the lamp on my bedside table, desperate to banish the darkness that suddenly felt oppressive. As light flooded the room, I tried to calm my racing heart, reminding myself that I was safe, that it was just a nightmare. A soft knock on my door made me jump. "Jake?" It was my roommate, Matt. "You okay in there? I heard you yelling." I took a deep breath, trying to steady my voice. "Yeah, I'm fine, just a bad dream." There was a pause, then the sound of the door opening. Matt stood there, concern etched on his face. "Another one? That's the third time this week, man." I nodded, unable to meet his eyes. "I know. I'm sorry if I woke you." Matt came into the room, sitting on the edge of my bed. "Don't apologize. I'm worried about you, Jake. We all are." I knew he was right. The lack of sleep was taking its toll, dark circles forming under my eyes, my nerves constantly on edge. But how could I explain that these nightmares were more than just dreams? That they felt like reliving that terrifying night over and over again? "I'm trying, Matt," I said softly. "It's just, it all felt so real. Even now I can still smell it, still see those eyes." Matt squeezed my shoulder gently. "I know it's hard, but you're safe now. That thing, whatever it was, it can't hurt you anymore." But even as he said it, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. The creature in my dreams, in my memories. It felt too real, too present, as if it was still out there, waiting. As Matt left the room, promising to make some chamomile tea to help me sleep, I found myself staring at the window. The darkness beyond seemed to press against the glass, hiding untold secrets. I knew I wouldn't be sleeping again tonight. The memory of the dream, so vivid and terrifying, had left me shaken to my core. But more than that, it had reignited the burning need to understand what had happened to me, to find proof that I wasn't crazy. As I reached for my laptop, determined to dive back into my research, a chill ran down my spine. For just a moment, I could have sworn I saw a pair of glowing red eyes staring at me from the darkness outside my window. But when I blinked, they were gone. Real or imagined, one thing was certain. The nightmare was far from over. The harsh fluorescent lights of the hospital corridor seemed to buzz in sync with the throbbing pain in my leg. I sat on the edge of an examination table, my hands trembling as I recounted my harrowing experience to yet another skeptical face. "Mr. Thompson?" the doctor said, peering at me over his glasses. "I understand you believe you were attacked by a Bigfoot?" His tone made it clear he thought I was delusional. I nodded, frustration bubbling up inside me. "I know how it sounds, but I'm telling you, it was real. It was huge, covered in hair, with these glowing red eyes." The doctor made a non-committal noise, scribbling something in my chart. "Well, your injuries are certainly severe, but consistent with an animal attack, perhaps a bear." "It wasn't a bear," I snapped, then immediately regretted my outburst. Taking a deep breath, I continued more calmly. "Look, I know what I saw. Is there any way to prove it? DNA from the wounds, or?" He shook his head. "I'm afraid not. Any trace evidence would have been compromised during your initial treatment. At this point, we can only focus on your recovery." As he left to prepare my discharge papers, I slumped back, a wave of despair washing over me. How could I prove what had happened when there was no evidence? The creature had disappeared without a trace, leaving me with nothing but my own traumatized memories and a body full of wounds that could be explained away as a common animal attack. A soft knock on the door pulled me from my thoughts. Matt, Cody, and Jess entered, their faces a mix of concern and relief. "Hey, buddy," Matt said, approaching cautiously. "How are you feeling?" I attempted a smile, but it felt more like a grimace, like I got mauled by a mythical creature. The joke fell flat, met with uncomfortable glances between my friends. Jess stepped forward, taking my hand. "Jake, we're worried about you. The doctor says you keep insisting it was, well, a Bigfoot," I finished for her. "Because that's what it was." Cody sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Look, man, we believe that you believe it, but you have to admit it sounds pretty far-fetched." I pulled my hand away from Jess, anger flaring inside me. "Far-fetched? You were there. You saw the state I was in when you found me. What do you think did this to me? A bear, maybe?" Matt suggested gently. "Or a mountain lion. The forest is full of dangerous animals." I shook my head vehemently. It wasn't a bear or a mountain lion. It was something I've never seen before. Something that shouldn't exist. The room fell into an uncomfortable silence. I could see the doubt in their eyes, the concern that maybe I had lost my mind along with my blood in that forest. "We're here for you, Jake," Jess said finally. "Whatever you need. But maybe talking to someone might help. A professional, I mean." The suggestion stung more than I wanted to admit. They thought I was crazy. Everyone did. And how could I blame them? If our roles were reversed, would I believe such an outlandish story? As my friends helped me gather my things and prepare to leave the hospital, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the window. The person staring back at me looked haggard, with dark circles under his eyes and a haunted expression that I barely recognized. The Bigfoot attack had left me scarred, both physically and mentally, a burden I would have to bear alone. Outside, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the parking lot. As we walked to Matt's car, I couldn't help but glance towards the distant tree line. The forest loomed dark and ominous, holding secrets that no one else believed. "You okay?" Cody asked, noticing my distraction. I nodded, tearing my gaze away from the trees. "Yeah, just thinking." As we drove away from the hospital, my mind raced with unanswered questions. What really happened in that forest? Why me? And most terrifyingly, was the creature still out there? Back at my apartment, my friends helped me get settled, making sure I had everything I needed for my recovery. Their care and concern was evident, even if it was tinged with doubt about my story. "Get some rest, Jake," Matt said as they prepared to leave. "And remember, we're just a phone call away if you need anything." I thanked them, forcing a smile that I didn't really feel. As the door closed behind them, the silence of my apartment felt oppressive. I hobbled to the window, staring out at the city lights, my gaze inevitably drawn to the dark smudge of the forest on the horizon. The truth of what happened that night in the woods seemed to weigh on me, a secret too fantastical for anyone to believe. As I stood there, my body aching from injuries that defied conventional explanation, I couldn't help but wonder, was the Bigfoot still out there, waiting to strike again? Would there be more victims, their stories forever lost to an unbelieving world? I turned away from the window, determination settling over me like a cloak. I may not have proof and no one may believe me, but I knew what I saw. And somehow, some way, I would find a way to prove it. The creature was real, and I would not rest until the world knew the truth. As I settled into bed, my laptop open beside me, ready to begin my research anew, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. The encounter in the forest may have been unique, but its impact would ripple through the rest of my life. And somewhere out there in the shadows of the trees, something waited. Something that shouldn't exist, but did. And I would find it. I should have known something was wrong the moment I stepped foot in the forest. The air was thick with a stifling silence that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. It was as if the very trees were holding their breath, waiting for something, or someone, to disturb the eerie calm. I'd been hiking this trail for years, ever since I was a kid. It was a familiar, comforting path that wound through the dense foliage, leading me to my favorite secluded spot by the creek. But today something felt off. The forest seemed to have a different energy, a palpable tension that set my nerves on edge. As I followed the well-worn trail, a sudden snap of a twig in the distance made me whirl around, heart pounding in my chest. I strained my eyes, searching the shadows between the trees, but saw nothing except the endless sea of verdant leaves and twisted branches. Dismissing it as a skittish deer or perhaps a curious squirrel, I turned back and continued my hike, trying to ignore the growing unease that gnawed at the pit of my stomach. The further I went, the more I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, unseen eyes tracking my every move. The deeper I hiked into the forest, the more uneasy I felt. The familiar landscape seemed to shift and morph around me, the trees looming ever taller and the shadows growing longer, as if the very forest itself was conspiring against me. I quickened my pace, desperate to reach the safety of my usual spot by the creek, but with each step, the sense of dread only intensified. The air was thick and heavy, making it difficult to breathe, and the silence was deafening, broken only by the occasional rustling of leaves and the distant chittering of birds. Suddenly, a bone-chilling howl echoed through the woods, a sound unlike anything I had ever heard. It was raw and inhuman, sending a chill down my spine that made my blood run cold. I froze, every muscle tensing as the primal scream reverberated through the trees, seeming to come from every direction at once. For a moment I was paralyzed, my heart pounding in my ears as I tried to make sense of what I had just heard. It couldn't be a wolf or a bear. No animal I knew of could produce a sound so unnatural. A part of me desperately wanted to chalk it up to my overactive imagination, to convince myself that it was just the wind playing tricks on my senses. But then, before I could even finish that thought, a massive, hairy shape emerged from the underbrush, towering over me with its teeth bared in a snarl. I stared up at the creature in stunned disbelief, my mind racing as I tried to process what I was seeing. It was unlike any animal I had ever encountered, a hulking, bipedal creature covered in coarse, dark fur, with deep-set eyes that glinted with a primal malevolence. Its movements were fluid and graceful, yet there was a raw, untamed power in the way it carried itself, like a predator sizing up its prey. As it fixed its gaze on me, I felt a surge of pure, unadulterated terror. There was no mistaking the intent in those eyes. This was no timid woodland creature, but a savage, relentless predator, driven by instinct and devoid of any semblance of humanity. I tried to back away, my legs trembling, but it was too late. The creature let out a deafening roar and surged forward, its massive arms reaching out to grab me. The world exploded into chaos as the massive creature lunged at me. Its huge, clawed hands swatted me to the ground with devastating force, knocking the wind out of my lungs. I hit the forest floor hard, my head spinning from the impact. "Help!" I screamed, my voice cracking with terror. "Somebody, please." But I knew it was useless. I was alone in the depths of the forest, with no one to hear my desperate pleas. The Bigfoot towered over me, its massive form blocking out the sunlight filtering through the trees. Its eyes, dark and filled with a primal hunger, bore into mine. I could smell its rank, musky odor, a mixture of wet fur and something far more feral. I tried to scramble backward, my fingers digging into the soft earth, but the creature was faster. With a guttural growl, it reached down and grabbed my leg, its grip like an iron vise. I kicked and thrashed, but it was like fighting against a freight train. "No, let go," I yelled, my voice hoarse with fear. The Bigfoot dragged me closer and I clawed desperately at the ground, grabbing onto roots and rocks, anything to slow my progress towards those gnashing teeth. But it was futile. The creature's strength was otherworldly. Suddenly, a searing pain ripped through my arm. I cried out in agony as the beast's jaws clamped down, warm blood soaking through my shirt. The pain was unlike anything I had ever experienced, a white-hot agony that threatened to overwhelm my senses. "Stop, please," I sobbed, tears streaming down my face. But the Bigfoot showed no signs of understanding or mercy. It shook its head violently, like a dog with a chew toy, and I felt something in my arm give way with a sickening pop. The world swam before my eyes, and for a moment I thought I might pass out from the pain. Adrenaline surging through my veins, I desperately clawed at the creature's face with my free hand. My nails raked across its thick, leathery skin, but it was like trying to scratch a boulder. I could feel my nails breaking, blood welling up under them, but the pain was nothing compared to the agony in my mangled arm. The Bigfoot released its grip on my arm, and for a brief moment I thought it might be retreating. But then it reared back, saliva dripping from its mouth, and let out an earth-shattering roar that vibrated in my very bones. Its breath was hot and foul-smelling, washing over me in nauseating waves. I tried to roll away to put some distance between us, but my injured arm wouldn't cooperate. Every movement sent fresh waves of agony coursing through my body. I could feel the warm, sticky blood pooling beneath me, soaking into the forest floor. "This can't be happening," I whispered, my voice trembling. "This has to be a nightmare." But the pain was too real, too visceral to be a dream. The Bigfoot loomed over me, its massive fist raised, ready to deal what I was sure would be the killing blow. I squeezed my eyes shut, certain that this was the end. My life flashed before my eyes, my family, my friends, all the things I'd never get to do or say. I tensed, waiting for the final, crushing impact, but it never came. After a moment that felt like an eternity, I cracked open my eyes. The Bigfoot was still there, its fist still raised, but something had changed. Its head was cocked to the side, nostrils flaring as it sniffed the air intently. I held my breath, afraid that even the slightest movement might redirect its attention back to me. The creature's eyes darted back and forth, searching for something beyond my comprehension. Its massive chest heaved with each breath, and I could see the muscles rippling beneath its thick fur. Then, without warning, it let out another bone-chilling howl. But this time, it wasn't directed at me. The Bigfoot turned its head, staring off into the depths of the forest as if it had heard a call that my human ears couldn't detect. Seizing my chance, I summoned every ounce of strength I had left and scrambled to my feet. Pain exploded through my body, my vision blurring at the edges, but I forced myself to move. I staggered forward, clutching my savaged arm to my chest, blood pouring from the wound and leaving a trail behind me. I could hear the thunderous footfalls of the Bigfoot behind me as I fled. Branches whipped at my face, roots threatened to trip me with every step, but I pushed on. My lungs burned, each breath a ragged gasp, but I didn't dare slow down. "Keep going," I panted to myself. "Don't look back, just keep moving." The forest seemed to close in around me, the trees blurring into a green maze as I ran. I had no idea where I was going, no sense of direction beyond the primal need to get away from the monster behind me. Just when I thought I couldn't go any further, when my legs felt like they were about to give out, I spotted something up ahead. A small opening in the rocky hillside, a cave. Without hesitating, I hurled myself towards it, praying that it would be deep enough to provide shelter. I dove into the cave, scraping my knees and elbows on the rough stone floor. The cool darkness enveloped me and I crawled deeper, pressing myself against the far wall. I tried to quiet my breathing, but my lungs were heaving, desperate for air after my frantic flight. Outside, I could hear the Bigfoot prowling. Its heavy footsteps shook the ground, and its guttural growls and snorts sent shivers down my spine. I pressed my hand over my mouth, trying to muffle the sound of my ragged breathing. "Please," I whispered, my voice barely audible even to my own ears. "Please don't find me." Minutes stretched into what felt like hours as I cowered in the darkness of the cave. The sounds of the Bigfoot's movements outside ebbed and flowed, sometimes fading into the distance only to return with heart-stopping clarity. As I sat there trembling and bleeding, the full weight of what had happened began to sink in. I had been attacked by a creature that shouldn't exist, something out of a nightmare or a cheap horror movie. And yet, the pain in my arm, the metallic taste of blood in my mouth, the lingering stench of the Bigfoot's breath, it was all too real. I don't know how long I stayed in that cave, huddled in the darkness, every muscle tense and ready to flee again at a moment's notice. But eventually, the sounds outside began to fade. The growls and footsteps grew more distant until they were swallowed up by the normal sounds of the forest. Still, I waited, too terrified to move. What if it was a trick? What if the Bigfoot was still out there, waiting for me to emerge? But as time passed and the silence outside remained unbroken, I began to consider my options. I was injured, possibly severely. I needed medical attention. And I needed to get out of this forest before the creature came back. With trembling fingers, I reached into my pocket for my phone, hoping to call for help. But my heart sank as I pulled out the shattered remains. The screen cracked beyond repair. It must have been crushed during the attack. "Okay," I whispered to myself, trying to stay calm. "You can do this. You just need to get back to the trail, then follow it out of the forest. You can make it." Gathering what little courage I had left, I slowly, painfully crawled to the mouth of the cave. I peered out, my eyes darting from tree to tree, searching for any sign of the Bigfoot. But the forest seemed calm, almost peaceful in the fading light of day. Taking a deep breath, I emerged from my hiding place, cradling my injured arm. Every movement sent fresh waves of pain through my body, but I forced myself to keep going. I had to get out of this forest. I had to survive. As I stumbled through the gathering darkness, trying to find my way back to the trail, one thought kept repeating in my mind: I will never go into this forest again. I lay there, frozen in terror, waiting for the final, crushing blow that would end my life. But miraculously, it never came. Confused and disoriented, I dared to open my eyes, my vision blurry with tears and pain. The massive creature that had been poised to strike was now distracted, its head tilted upward, nostrils flaring as it sniffed the air intently. For a moment I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, afraid that even the slightest twitch would bring its attention crashing back down on me. But as the Bigfoot continued to scan the forest, seemingly oblivious to my presence, I knew this might be my only chance to escape. Gritting my teeth against the searing pain in my arm, I slowly, carefully began to push myself up. Every movement sent fresh waves of agony through my body, and I had to bite my lip to keep from crying out. Blood dripped steadily from my mangled arm, soaking into the forest floor beneath me. The Bigfoot let out a low, rumbling growl, and I froze again, certain it had noticed my movement. But its gaze remained fixed on something in the distance, something beyond my comprehension. "Now," I whispered to myself, gathering every ounce of strength I had left. "It's now or never." In one fluid motion, I scrambled to my feet and took off running. The sudden movement caught the Bigfoot's attention, and it let out an ear-splitting roar that shook the very ground beneath my feet. But I didn't look back. I couldn't. I just ran. Every step was agony. My injured arm hung uselessly at my side, blood pouring from the wound with each jarring impact. Branches whipped at my face as I crashed through the underbrush, leaving stinging cuts across my cheeks and forehead. My lungs burned, desperate for air, but I couldn't slow down. Behind me, I could hear the thunderous footfalls of the Bigfoot as it gave chase. The sound spurred me on, pushing me beyond what I thought my body was capable of. Trees blurred past me as I ran, my vision tunneling until all I could see was the path ahead. "Keep going," I gasped between ragged breaths. "Don't stop. Don't look back." But I was tiring quickly. The blood loss and shock were taking their toll, and my steps were becoming more unsteady with each passing moment. I could feel the Bigfoot gaining on me, its hot breath seeming to tickle the back of my neck. Just when I thought I couldn't go any further, when my legs felt like they were about to give out beneath me, I spotted something up ahead. A small opening in the rocky hillside. A cave. Without hesitating, without even considering if it might be a dead end, I changed course and made a beeline for it. "Please," I prayed silently. "Please let me make it." With the last burst of energy I could muster, I hurled myself towards the cave entrance. I could feel the rush of air as the Bigfoot's massive hand swung at me, missing by mere inches. Then I was inside, tumbling onto the cold, hard stone floor of the cave. I scrambled deeper into the darkness, pressing myself against the far wall, trying to make myself as small as possible. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure the Bigfoot could hear it, even over its own furious roars. For a terrifying moment, I thought the creature would follow me in. Its massive form blocked out the light from the cave entrance, and I could see its glowing eyes searching the darkness. But whether it was too large to fit through the opening or simply unwilling to enter such a confined space, it remained outside. I cowered in the darkness, listening in terror as the Bigfoot prowled just beyond the cave entrance. Its guttural growls and snorts sent shivers down my spine, each sound a reminder of how close I had come to death. The stench of its musky odor filled the air, making me gag. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours as I sat there, trembling and bleeding. The sounds of the Bigfoot's movements outside ebbed and flowed, sometimes fading into the distance only to return with heart-stopping clarity. Each time it drew near, I pressed myself further into the cold stone, as if I could somehow melt into the wall itself. "Go away," I whispered, my voice barely audible even to my own ears. "Please, just go away." As the adrenaline began to wear off, the full extent of my injuries made themselves known. My arm throbbed with a pain so intense it made me nauseous. I could feel the sticky warmth of blood soaking through my shirt, and I knew I needed medical attention soon. But I didn't dare move. The memory of the Bigfoot's savage attack was too fresh, too raw. So I sat there in the darkness, shivering from shock and blood loss, straining my ears for any sign that the creature had left. Gradually, almost imperceptibly, the sounds outside began to change. The Bigfoot's growls became less frequent, its movements more distant. The normal sounds of the forest, birds chirping, leaves rustling in the wind, slowly returned. Still, I waited, too terrified to move. What if it was a trick? What if the Bigfoot was still out there, waiting for me to emerge? As time passed and the silence outside remained unbroken, I began to consider my options. I was injured, possibly severely. I needed medical attention, and I needed to get out of this forest before the creature came back. With trembling fingers, I reached into my pocket for my phone, hoping to call for help. But my heart sank as I pulled out the shattered remains. The screen cracked beyond repair. It must have been crushed during the attack or my frantic flight through the forest. "Okay," I whispered to myself, trying to stay calm. "You can do this. You just need to get back to the trail, then follow it out of the forest. You can make it." Gathering what little courage I had left, I slowly, painfully crawled to the mouth of the cave. I peered out, my eyes darting from tree to tree, searching for any sign of the Bigfoot. But the forest seemed calm, almost peaceful in the fading light of day. Taking a deep breath, I emerged from my hiding place, cradling my injured arm. Every movement sent fresh waves of pain through my body, but I forced myself to keep going. I had to get out of this forest. I had to survive. As I stumbled through the gathering darkness, trying to find my way back to the trail, one thought kept repeating in my mind: I will never go into this forest again. I huddled in the damp darkness of the cave, my body racked with pain and terror. Time seemed to stretch endlessly as I strained my ears, listening for any sign of the monstrous creature that had attacked me. After what felt like an eternity, the forest outside gradually returned to its normal sounds: the rustle of leaves, the distant call of birds. The ominous growls and heavy footsteps of the Bigfoot had faded away. Gathering what little courage I had left, I slowly, painfully crawled towards the cave entrance. Every movement sent shockwaves of agony through my battered body, but I knew I couldn't stay here forever. I had to get help. As I emerged from the cave, the fading daylight assaulted my eyes. I blinked rapidly, trying to adjust and scan my surroundings for any sign of danger. The forest seemed eerily peaceful, as if the horrific attack had never happened. But the searing pain in my arm and the blood-soaked tatters of my shirt were stark reminders of the nightmare I'd just endured. "Okay," I whispered to myself, my voice hoarse and trembling. You can do this. Just find the trail. Get back home. Cradling my mangled arm against my chest, I stumbled forward. Each step was a monumental effort, my legs shaking from exhaustion and blood loss. The forest floor was treacherous, hidden roots and fallen branches threatening to trip me with every step. Leaves and twigs whipped across my face and arms, leaving stinging cuts. But I barely noticed the new pain amidst the overwhelming agony of my injuries. As I staggered through the woods, I tried to orient myself, to find some familiar landmark that would guide me back to the trail. But in my panicked flight from the Bigfoot, I had run blindly, with no thought to direction. Now, everything looked alien and threatening. "Hello?" I called out weakly, hoping against hope that someone might hear me. "Is anyone there? I need help." But only the indifferent whisper of the wind through the trees answered me. As night began to fall, my situation grew more desperate. The familiar landscape morphed into a nightmarish maze of shadowy trees and grasping branches. Shapes seemed to shift and move in my peripheral vision, making me flinch and stumble. Was it just my imagination, or was something out there watching me? "This can't be happening," I muttered, fighting back tears of pain and frustration. "I know these woods. I've hiked here 100 times. How can I be lost?" But lost I was. The growing darkness seemed to press in around me, the trees looming ever taller, their branches reaching out like gnarled fingers. My breath came in ragged gasps, and spots danced before my eyes. The blood loss and shock were taking their toll. Finally, my legs gave out. I collapsed against the rough bark of a massive tree, sliding down to sit at its base. The impact sent fresh waves of agony through my body, and I couldn't hold back a sob of pain and despair. "Help," I whispered, though I knew no one could hear me. "Please, somebody help me." As I sat there fighting to stay conscious, the full weight of my situation crashed down on me. I was alone in the wilderness, severely injured, with no way to call for help. The creature that had attacked me was still out there somewhere, and even if I did manage to survive the night, would anyone believe my story? Would they think I was crazy or lying? "No one's going to believe this," I said aloud, my voice cracking. "A Bigfoot attack? They'll think I'm insane." The thought of trying to explain what had happened to me, to doctors, to the police, to my family, was almost as terrifying as the attack itself. How could I make them understand the primal fear, the sheer impossibility of what I'd experienced? As these thoughts swirled through my mind, the eerie silence of the forest was suddenly shattered by a bone-chilling howl in the distance. The sound cut through me like a knife, instantly recognizable as the same inhuman roar I'd heard earlier. The Bigfoot was still out there, and it was getting closer. Terror gave me strength I didn't know I had. Ignoring the screaming protest of my battered body, I scrambled to my feet, using the tree for support. "No, no, no," I panted, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. "Not again. Please, not again." I forced myself to move, stumbling forward with renewed desperation. The pain in my arm had faded to a dull, throbbing ache, overwhelmed by the surge of adrenaline coursing through my veins. Every shadow seemed to hide a lurking threat, every rustle of leaves a potential attack. Another howl echoed through the forest, closer this time. I could almost feel the vibration of it in my bones. Panic threatened to overwhelm me, but I pushed it down, focusing all my energy on putting one foot in front of the other. "Just keep moving," I told myself, the words coming out in gasps between ragged breaths. "Don't stop. Don't look back." As I pushed through the underbrush, my foot caught on a hidden root, sending me sprawling to the ground. I hit hard, crying out as fresh pain exploded through my injured arm. For a moment I lay there, dazed and winded, the taste of blood and dirt in my mouth. The sound of heavy footsteps and breaking branches snapped me back to reality. Something was coming, and it was close. With a surge of desperate energy, I pulled myself up and started running again, blind terror driving me forward. Branches whipped at my face, Roots threatened to trip me at every step, but I didn't slow down. I couldn't. The memory of those massive hands, those razor-sharp teeth spurred me on beyond what I thought my body was capable of. As I ran, a glimmer of hope sparked in my chest. Through the trees ahead I could see lights, distant but unmistakable. Civilization, safety. If I could just reach those lights, maybe I'd have a chance. With renewed determination, I pushed myself harder, ignoring the burning in my lungs and the stabbing pain with each step. The lights grew closer, a beacon of hope in the darkness. Behind me, I could hear the creature crashing through the underbrush, gaining ground with every moment. Its guttural growls seemed to fill the air around me, driving me to the very limits of my endurance. As I burst through the tree line, I saw a road ahead, and beyond it, the welcoming glow of house lights. I was almost there, almost safe. "Help!" I screamed, my voice raw and desperate. "Somebody help me!" I sprinted across the road, risking a glance back as I reached the other side. There, at the edge of the forest, I saw it. A massive, shadowy figure, its eyes gleaming in the darkness. For a moment, our gazes locked, and I felt a chill run down my spine. Then, as headlights appeared around the bend in the road, the creature melted back into the shadows of the forest, disappearing as if it had never been there at all. I collapsed onto the nearest lawn, my body finally giving out. As consciousness began to fade, I saw porch lights flicking on, heard voices calling out in alarm. My entire world had narrowed to a single all-consuming task. Keep moving. Each step was a battle against my own failing body, a desperate struggle to stay upright and conscious. The forest around me swam in and out of focus, trees blurring into shadowy masses that seemed to shift and pulse with every labored breath I took. "Just keep going," I gasped, the words barely audible even to my own ears. My injured arm hung uselessly at my side, a constant source of searing agony that threatened to overwhelm me at any moment. Blood loss and shock had left me dizzy and disoriented, and I stumbled more than walked, ricocheting off tree trunks and stumbling over roots. I had long since lost any sense of direction or purpose, beyond the primal urge to escape, to find help, to survive. Time had become meaningless, stretched and distorted by pain and fear. Had I been wandering for hours, days? It felt like an eternity since the monstrous creature had first attacked me, leaving me battered and terrified in this endless nightmare of trees and shadows. Just when I thought I couldn't take another step, when the temptation to simply collapse and give up was becoming overwhelming, I saw it. A faint, flickering glow piercing through the dense foliage ahead. At first I was certain it was a hallucination, a cruel trick of my exhausted mind. But as I staggered closer, the light grew stronger, more defined. A flashlight. Someone was out here. Hope surged through me, giving me a final burst of energy. I pushed forward with renewed determination, fixated on that beacon of potential rescue. "Help!" I tried to shout, but it came out as little more than a hoarse whisper. I cleared my throat and tried again, louder this time. "Help! I'm here! Please!" My heart pounded as I saw a figure moving through the trees, the flashlight beam sweeping back and forth. They were getting closer. I was going to be saved. "Over here!" I called out, waving my good arm frantically. "Please, I need help!" The figure paused, then began moving more purposefully in my direction. Relief washed over me in a dizzying wave. I was so focused on my approaching savior that I didn't immediately register the wrongness of their movements, the lumbering gait, the unnaturally large silhouette. It wasn't until the figure emerged from the shadows, fully illuminated by the flashlight's beam, that the horrifying truth hit me. This was no rescuer. The massive, fur-covered form, the gleaming eyes, the unmistakable stench, it was the Bigfoot. And clutched in one enormous, clawed hand was the flashlight I had mistaken for salvation. A deep, guttural growl rumbled from the creature's chest, a sound that vibrated through my very bones. I stood frozen, paralyzed by a terror so profound it transcended my physical pain. This couldn't be happening. Not again. Not when I had been so close to escape. No, I whimpered, taking an unsteady step backward. Please, no. But there was no mercy in those inhuman eyes, only a cold, predatory intelligence. The Bigfoot lumbered towards me with terrifying purpose, ready to finish what it had started earlier. I knew with sickening certainty that I wouldn't survive a second encounter. My survival instinct finally kicked in, overriding the paralyzing fear. I turned to run, but my battered body betrayed me. My legs buckled, sending me crashing to the forest floor. Pain exploded through me as I landed on my injured arm, and for a moment the world went white. When my vision cleared, I found myself staring up at the looming form of the Bigfoot. It towered over me, a mountain of muscle and fur, its breath hot and fetid on my face. I could see my own terrified reflection in its dark, glinting eyes. Someone, I whispered, a final futile plea. Anyone, help me. The creature raised one massive arm, claws glinting in the erratic beam of the flashlight it still held. I squeezed my eyes shut, bracing for the killing blow, but it never came. Instead, a cacophony of noise suddenly erupted around us. Shouts, the crackle of radios, the unmistakable sound of dogs barking. My eyes flew open just in time to see the Bigfoot's head snap up, its attention diverted by the commotion. "Over here," a distant voice called out. I heard something. The Bigfoot let out a furious roar that shook the very air around us. For a heartbeat, it seemed torn between finishing me off and fleeing from the approaching search party. Then, with a speed that belied its massive size, it turned and crashed back into the underbrush, disappearing into the shadows as quickly as it had appeared. I lay there gasping for breath, my mind struggling to process what had just happened. Had I imagined it all? But no. The lingering stench, the trampled vegetation around me, and most of all the dropped flashlight lying just out of reach were all too real. Hello? A new voice, closer now. Human. Is someone there? Here. I croaked, my voice barely above a whisper. I cleared my throat and tried again, louder. I'm here. Please help. Flashlight beams crisscrossed through the trees, and I heard the sound of people approaching. A moment later, a face appeared above me, a park ranger, her expression a mixture of concern and relief. "It's okay," she said, kneeling beside me. "We've got you. You're safe now." As other rescuers converged on our position, I felt a hysterical laugh bubbling up in my chest. Safe? They had no idea what was out there, what I had just narrowly escaped. And how could I possibly explain it to them? "What happened to you?" the ranger asked, her eyes widening as she took in my injuries. Was it a bear attack? I opened my mouth, then closed it again. How could I tell them the truth? That I had been attacked not once but twice by a creature that wasn't supposed to exist. That the monster from campfire stories and blurry photographs was real, and far more terrifying than any legend could convey. I don't know, I finally managed, the lie tasting bitter on my tongue. It all happened so fast. I need to get out of here, please. The ranger nodded, gesturing to her colleagues to bring a stretcher. As they prepared to move me, I caught sight of the flashlight the Bigfoot had dropped. Tangible proof of my encounter, proof that I wasn't crazy. But even as I watched, another ranger picked it up, examining it curiously. "Huh," he said. "Must have been dropped by a previous search party. Good thing we found it." And just like that, the last piece of evidence slipped away. I knew then that no one would ever believe my story. As the rescue team carefully lifted me onto the stretcher, I felt a deep, gnawing dread settle in my gut. I was being rescued, yes, but I was leaving these woods with a burden I would carry for the rest of my life. The knowledge of what really lurked in the shadows, and the certainty that I would never be believed. The world around me blurred into a chaotic mess of shadows and foliage as I ran for my life. Every muscle in my body screamed in protest, but the thunderous footsteps behind me were a constant reminder of the danger I faced. The Bigfoot's hot, fetid breath seemed to tickle the back of my neck, spurring me on beyond what I thought my battered body was capable of. "Keep going," I gasped to myself, the words coming out in ragged pants. "Don't stop. Don't look back." I zigzagged between the trees, desperate to put any obstacle I could between myself and the monstrous creature pursuing me. Branches whipped at my face, leaving stinging cuts, but I barely noticed. The pain in my mangled arm had faded to a dull throb, overwhelmed by the surge of adrenaline coursing through my veins. Just when I thought my legs would give out, I spotted a massive fallen log ahead. In that split second, I made a decision that would either save my life or seal my fate. With the last reserves of my strength, I pushed off the ground and leaped. Time seemed to slow as I soared over the log, my body stretched out horizontally. For a terrifying moment, I thought I wouldn't make it, that I'd crash into the log and be at the mercy of the beast behind me. But then I was over, landing hard on the other side. The impact sent shockwaves of pain through my injured arm, but I didn't have time to dwell on it. I scrambled to my feet, risking a glance back. To my immense relief, the Bigfoot's momentum had carried it straight into the log. The creature let out a pained roar that shook the very air around me as it tumbled to the ground, its massive bulk working against it. "Go, go, go!" I urged myself, seizing this chance. I hurled myself forward with renewed desperation. Every muscle burned, my lungs felt like they were on fire, but I pushed on. The sound of splintering wood behind me told me that the Bigfoot was already recovering, but I didn't dare look back again. The trees began to thin out, and suddenly, miraculously, I burst out of the forest. The familiar sight of my neighborhood street stretched out before me, the neat rows of houses a beacon of hope in the gathering darkness. For a moment I stood frozen at the edge of the woods, my mind struggling to process the abrupt transition from primal terror to suburban normalcy. Then the sound of crashing undergrowth from the forest snapped me back to reality. I staggered forward, my legs barely able to support me now that the immediate danger had passed. Blood dripped steadily from my injured arm, leaving a trail on the sidewalk as I lurched towards the nearest house. With my good hand, I pounded on the door, each impact sending fresh waves of pain through my battered body. "Help!" I screamed, my voice hoarse and desperate. "Please, somebody help me!" After what felt like an eternity, the porch light flickered on, and the door creaked open. A middle-aged couple stood there, their eyes widening in shock as they took in my bloodied, disheveled appearance. "Oh my God," the woman gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "What happened to you?" I opened my mouth to explain, but the words caught in my throat. How could I possibly convey the horror of what I'd just experienced? I was attacked, I finally managed, the words tumbling out in a rush. "In the forest. There's a creature out there, something huge, like a Bigfoot. Please, you have to believe me. We need to call the police, warn everyone." I trailed off, seeing the looks exchanged between the couple. It was a mixture of concern and skepticism that I'd become all too familiar with in the past few hours. "Son," the man said gently, "you're clearly hurt. Let's get you inside and call an ambulance. You're not thinking straight right now." "No, you don't understand," I insisted, desperation creeping into my voice. "It's real. It's out there right now. I barely escaped with my life." But even as I spoke, I could see the doubt in their eyes hardening into certainty. They saw me as delusional, driven mad by whatever real danger I'd encountered in the woods. "It's okay," the woman soothed, reaching out to guide me inside. "You're safe now. We'll get you help." As they ushered me into their home, I couldn't help but glance back at the dark line of trees bordering the street. For a moment, I thought I saw a massive shape moving in the shadows, a pair of gleaming eyes watching me. But when I blinked, it was gone. Inside the house, the couple sat me down on their couch, heedless of the blood staining their upholstery. The woman pressed a clean towel against my wounded arm, while the man called 911. "Yes, we need an ambulance," I heard him say. "Young man badly injured. Looks like some kind of animal attack. He's not entirely coherent." I wanted to protest, to make them understand the true nature of the danger, but exhaustion was quickly overtaking me. The adrenaline that had kept me going was fading, leaving me weak and shaky. "Please," I mumbled, fighting to keep my eyes open. "You have to believe me, the Bigfoot, and it's real, it's out there." The couple exchanged another worried look over my head. "Shh," the woman said soothingly. "It's all right. Help is on the way. You're going to be fine." As I sat there, surrounded by the trappings of normal everyday life, the reality of my situation began to sink in. I had survived a nightmare, escaped a monster that shouldn't exist. But in doing so, I had crossed a threshold into a world where no one would ever believe me. The sound of approaching sirens filled the air, and a wave of conflicting emotions washed over me. Relief at the promise of medical attention warred with the growing dread of trying to explain what had happened to me. As unconsciousness began to claim me, my last coherent thought was a grim realization. My ordeal in the forest might be over, but a new kind of struggle was just beginning. A struggle to be believed, to come to terms with what I'd experienced, and to live with the knowledge that a monster roamed free in the woods behind my home. The wail of sirens pierced through the fog of my semi-consciousness as the ambulance screeched to a halt outside the house. I was vaguely aware of paramedics rushing in, their voices a blur of medical jargon and urgent commands. As they lifted me onto a stretcher, I caught sight of police cars pulling up, their flashing lights casting eerie shadows across the familiar suburban landscape. "Please," I mumbled, my voice weak and slurred. "You have to warn everyone. The Bigfoot, it's out there." One of the paramedics exchanged a concerned glance with his partner. "Sir, try to stay calm. You're safe now. We're going to take good care of you." As they wheeled me out to the ambulance, I saw a group of police officers converging on the couple who had taken me in. Their expressions were a mixture of concern and barely concealed skepticism as the couple recounted what I had told them. "He claims he was attacked by a Bigfoot in the forest," I heard the man say, his voice tinged with embarrassment. "Poor guy's obviously been through something terrible, but..." One of the officers nodded, his face a mask of professional neutrality. "We'll investigate, of course, but it sounds like he might be suffering from some kind of delusion brought on by trauma." Anger and frustration welled up inside me, but before I could protest, the ambulance doors slammed shut, cutting me off from the scene. As we sped towards the hospital, I caught glimpses through the window of search parties being organized at the edge of the forest, but even in my battered state, I could see the lack of urgency in their movements, the barely concealed smirks on some of their faces. They were going through the motions, humoring what they saw as the ravings of a madman. "You don't understand," I said to the paramedic monitoring my vitals. "It's real. The Bigfoot, it nearly killed me. Why won't anyone believe me?" The paramedic patted my hand gently. "Sir, you've been through a traumatic experience. Your mind might be playing tricks on you. Let's focus on getting you treated, okay?" At the hospital, I was rushed into the emergency room. Doctors and nurses swarmed around me, their efficient movements a stark contrast to the chaos of my recent ordeal. They cleaned and stitched my wounds, ran tests, and hooked me up to various machines. But even as they worked, I could see the doubt in their eyes. When I tried to explain what had happened, the lead doctor exchanged a meaningful look with a nurse. "Mr. Johnson," he said gently, "you've suffered significant blood loss and trauma. It's not uncommon for the mind to create unusual explanations in these situations. Let's focus on your physical recovery for now, shall we?" I wanted to scream to make them understand, but exhaustion was quickly overtaking me. As they finished treating my wounds, I heard the doctor murmuring to a nurse about a potential psych evaluation. Hours later, I awoke to find my family gathered around my hospital bed. My parents' faces were etched with worry, while my sister hovered nervously in the background. "Oh, honey," my mother said, grasping my hand. "We were so worried. What happened to you out there?" Taking a deep breath, I recounted my harrowing experience. I told them about the initial attack, my desperate flight through the forest, and the final terrifying encounter that had nearly cost me my life. As I spoke, I could see their expressions shifting from concern to confusion to outright disbelief. "Sweetie," my father said cautiously, "are you sure that's what happened? Maybe you fell and hit your head, or could it have been a bear?" "No," I insisted, frustration bubbling up. "I know what I saw. It was a Bigfoot, Dad. It was huge and it was real and it tried to kill me." My sister stepped forward, her voice gentle but patronizing. "Come on, bro. Bigfoot? Really? You know those are just stories, right?" I looked from face to face, searching for any sign of belief, any willingness to consider that I might be telling the truth. But all I saw was doubt, concern, and a growing certainty that I had lost my mind. "You have to believe me," I pleaded, my voice cracking. "Why would I make this up?" My mother squeezed my hand, her eyes brimming with tears. "We believe that you believe it, honey. But, well, the doctors say the trauma might have affected your memory. They want to run some tests, maybe have you talk to someone." As my family's words washed over me, a cold, hollow feeling settled in my chest. They didn't believe me. No one believed me. And why would they? A Bigfoot attack in suburban America? It sounded insane even to my own ears, despite having lived through the terror of it. After my family left, promising to return in the morning, I lay alone in my hospital bed, staring at the stark white ceiling. The memory of the Bigfoot's savage attack played on repeat in my mind. The creature's massive form, its inhuman strength, the primal fear it had awakened in me. It had been real as the pain throbbing through my body, as real as the stitches holding my wounds closed. But as I lay there, listening to the quiet beep of monitors and the distant sounds of the hospital at night, a chilling realization settled over me. The creature had left no evidence behind. No tracks, no fur, nothing that couldn't be explained away as the result of my own desperate flight through the forest. It was my word against the rational, Bigfoot-free world everyone else lived in. A nurse poked her head in, checking on me before lights out. "How are you feeling, Mr. Johnson? Can I get you anything?" I opened my mouth, then closed it again. What could I say? That I was terrified of closing my eyes, afraid I'd see those glinting, predatory eyes again? That I felt like I was going crazy, doubting my own memories despite knowing in my bones that they were real? "No," I finally said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I'm fine. Thank you." As darkness fell and the hospital quieted, I lay awake, my mind racing. How could I make people believe me? How could I warn them about the danger lurking in the woods? And how could I ever feel safe again, knowing what I knew? The night stretched on, long and lonely, filled with the echoes of bestial roars and the phantom sensation of hot, fetid breath on my neck. As exhaustion finally began to claim me, one thought crystallized in my mind. No one would ever believe my story. The days following my release from the hospital blurred together in a haze of fear and sleepless nights. Each time I closed my eyes, I was transported back to that terrifying moment in the forest. The Bigfoot's massive form loomed over me, its hot, fetid breath on my face, those inhuman eyes gleaming with primal hunger. I'd wake up screaming, drenched in sweat, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. "It's okay, honey," my mother would say, rushing into my room. "It was just a nightmare. You're safe now." But I wasn't safe. How could I be, when no one believed the danger was real? During the day, I was a nervous wreck. Every sudden noise made me jump, my eyes darting around, searching for a threat that my rational mind knew wasn't there. The slam of a car door, a dog barking in the distance, the rustle of leaves in the wind. Each sound sent a jolt of adrenaline through my system, leaving me shaky and exhausted. One afternoon, while sitting on our back porch, a branch snapped in the nearby woods. I leapt to my feet, knocking over my chair, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. "Whoa, easy there," my father said, placing a steadying hand on my shoulder. "It's probably just a squirrel or something." I nodded, trying to slow my breathing, but I couldn't tear my eyes away from the tree line. What if it wasn't just a squirrel? What if it was back, watching, waiting? As the days passed, my physical wounds began to heal. The cuts and bruises faded. The stitches were removed, leaving behind a network of angry red scars. But the emotional trauma cut far deeper. I found myself unable to relax, even in the comfort of my own home. Every shadow held a potential threat, every unexplained sound a harbinger of danger. My friends tried to be supportive, inviting me out, trying to get me back into my normal routine. But how could I explain that nothing felt normal anymore? "Come on, man," my best friend Jake said one day, practically dragging me out of the house. "You can't stay cooped up in there forever. Let's go grab a burger or something." I reluctantly agreed, but the outing was a disaster. The crowded restaurant felt oppressive, the chatter of other diners grating on my nerves. When a waiter dropped a tray nearby, I nearly upended our table in my panic to get away. Jake watched me with a mixture of concern and frustration. "Dude, you need to relax. I get that you went through something scary, but you're safe now. You can't let it control your life like this." But that was just it. I wasn't safe. None of us were. There was a monster out there, and no one believed me. My family tried their best to be understanding, but I could see the strain it was putting on them. They walked on eggshells around me, careful not to mention anything related to the forest or my accident. One evening, I overheard my parents talking in hushed tones in the kitchen. "I'm worried about him," my mother said, her voice thick with emotion. "He's not getting better. Maybe we should consider that therapy the doctor suggested." My father sighed heavily. "I know, but you know how he is. He's convinced himself that this Bigfoot thing is real. I'm afraid pushing therapy might just make him retreat further into this delusion." Their words stung, even though I knew they meant well. They couldn't understand. They hadn't seen what I had seen, felt the terrifying strength of the creature, smelled its wild, musky odor. Desperate for answers, for any shred of evidence that might validate my experience, I threw myself into research. I scoured the internet for Bigfoot sightings, ordered every book I could find on the subject, and pored over grainy photographs and shaky video footage. My room became a shrine to my obsession. Maps of reported sightings covered one wall, red strings connecting locations, dates, descriptions. Blurry photographs and artist renditions of the creature stared down at me from another. My desk was piled high with books, their pages bristling with sticky notes and highlighter marks. But the more I researched, the more questions I had. For every compelling piece of evidence, there were a dozen hoaxes or easily explained misidentifications. The academic community dismissed Bigfoot as a myth, a product of overactive imaginations and a human need to believe in the mysterious. Late one night, as I sat surrounded by my research, a wave of despair washed over me. What if they were right? What if I was crazy? But no, I knew what I had seen, what I had felt. The terror had been too real, the danger too immediate. I picked up a book, flipping through its pages until I came to an illustration that made my blood run cold. The artist's rendition was crude, but the eyes, those eyes were exactly as I remembered them, primal, intelligent, and utterly inhuman. A sob caught in my throat as I stared at the image. I was alone in this. No one would ever truly understand what I had been through, what I was still going through. How could they, when the very idea of Bigfoot was relegated to the realm of myth and cheap tabloid stories? As I sat there, surrounded by the fruits of my obsessive research, a grim determination settled over me. I might be alone in my knowledge, but that didn't make it any less real. The creature was out there, and even if no one believed me, I had to find a way to prove it. For my own sanity, and for the safety of everyone who unknowingly shared their world with a monster. I closed the book and stood up, my joints creaking from sitting for so long. Outside my window, the forest loomed dark and forbidding. Somewhere in those woods, the creature was out there. And somehow, some way, I would find a way to make the world believe. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across my bedroom as I sat by the window, staring out at the forest that bordered our property. It had been less than 2 days since my encounter with the Bigfoot, but it felt like a lifetime ago. The physical pain from my injuries was still present, a constant reminder of the ordeal I had survived. But it was the psychological trauma that weighed heaviest on me. I tried to focus on the mundane task of sorting through the get well cards that had arrived earlier that day. Friends, family, even a few neighbors had sent their well wishes. But as I read through them, I couldn't help but feel a disconnect between their words and my reality. "Get better soon," one card chirped. If only it were that simple. My mother's voice drifted up from downstairs. "Honey, dinner's ready if you're feeling up to coming down." I sighed, running a hand through my hair. "I'll be down in a minute, Mom," I called back, my voice still hoarse from all the screaming I'd done in the forest. As I stood up, my gaze was drawn back to the window. The trees seemed to loom larger than ever, their branches reaching out like gnarled fingers. For a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of movement in the shadows. My heart rate spiked and I stumbled back, nearly knocking over my bedside lamp. "It's not there," I muttered to myself, trying to slow my breathing. "It's gone. You're safe." But even as I said the words, I knew they weren't true. The Bigfoot might not be visible, but its presence lingered like a malevolent spirit, tainting everything around me. I made my way downstairs, each step a reminder of my narrow escape. My parents were already seated at the dining table, their faces etched with concern as I entered the room. "How are you feeling, son?" my father asked, his voice gentle. I shrugged, lowering myself carefully into a chair. "About the same," I replied, not meeting their eyes. An uncomfortable silence fell over the table as we began to eat. I could feel their worried glances, could almost hear the unspoken questions hanging in the air. Finally, my mother broke the silence. "We were thinking," she began hesitantly, "maybe it would be good for you to talk to someone. A professional, I mean. Dr. Michaels recommended a therapist who specializes in trauma." "I don't need a therapist," I snapped, more harshly than I intended. "I need people to believe me." My father sighed, putting down his fork. "Son, we believe that you went through something traumatic. But a Bigfoot? It's hard to accept." I pushed my plate away, my appetite gone. "I know what I saw, Dad. What I experienced. It was real." "We're not saying it wasn't real to you," my mother interjected, reaching out to touch my hand. I flinched involuntarily, and she withdrew, hurt flashing across her face. "We just want to help you process what happened." I stood up abruptly, my chair scraping against the floor. "I'm not crazy," I said, my voice low and intense. "It's out there, and as long as no one believes me, everyone who goes into those woods is in danger." Without waiting for a response, I turned and headed back upstairs, ignoring my parents' calls. Back in my room, I slumped onto my bed, my eyes drawn once again to the window, to the forest beyond. As night fell, the trees became indistinct shapes in the darkness. But to me, every shadow held the potential for danger. Every rustle of leaves in the wind became the sound of massive footsteps. Every distant animal call transformed into the beginning of that bone-chilling roar. Sleep, when it finally came, was fitful and plagued by nightmares. In my dreams, I was back in the forest running for my life. But this time, there was no escape. The Bigfoot's massive hands would close around me, its hot breath on my neck, and I would wake up screaming, drenched in sweat. In the early hours of the morning, I found myself sitting by the window again, watching as the first light of dawn began to creep over the horizon. The forest, which had once been a place of solace and adventure, now loomed like a prison wall, trapping me in a world of fear and disbelief. A knock at my door startled me out of my reverie. "Honey?" my mother's voice called softly. "Are you awake? There's someone here to see you." Curious despite my exhaustion, I made my way downstairs. In the living room, I found a man in a police uniform talking quietly with my parents. He turned as I entered, his face neutral but kind. "Mr. Johnson, he said, extending his hand. "I'm Officer Reeves. I'm here to follow up on your incident in the forest." I shook his hand warily, noting the careful way he avoided mentioning the Bigfoot. "Have you found any evidence?" I asked, a spark of hope igniting in my chest. Officer Reeves shook his head. "I'm afraid not. We've combed the area you described, but we haven't found anything out of the ordinary. No unusual tracks, no signs of a large animal." My heart sank. Of course they hadn't found anything. The creature was too smart, too elusive to leave obvious traces. "But," the officer continued, "given the extent of your injuries, we're taking your report seriously. We've increased patrols in the area and posted warnings about potential dangerous wildlife." I nodded, grateful for at least this small acknowledgement, even if they didn't fully believe me. As Officer Reeves prepared to leave, he paused at the door. "Mr. Johnson," he said, his voice low, "I've been on the force for 20 years. I've seen a lot of strange things in these woods. I can't say I believe in Bigfoot, but, well, just know that we're not dismissing your experience entirely." With that, he was gone, leaving me standing in the doorway, staring out at the forest that had become both my tormentor and my obsession. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to my core, that I would never step foot in those woods again. The Bigfoot's shadow had fallen over my life, a lingering presence that would haunt me for years to come. As I turned back to face my concerned parents, I realized that my ordeal was far from over. The physical wounds would heal, but the scars left on my psyche would take far longer to fade. And always, there would be the knowledge that out there, hidden in the depths of the forest, a monster lurked, waiting for its next unsuspecting victim. The forest had always been my sanctuary, a place where I could escape the stresses of everyday life and bask in the tranquility of nature. I loved the way the wind rustled through the tall trees, the soft chirping of birds, and the gentle crunch of leaves beneath my feet as I hiked along the familiar trails. It was my own personal oasis, a haven where I could find the peace and solitude I craved. As I set out on my usual route that afternoon, the sun was high in the cloudless sky, casting a warm glow over the lush greenery that surrounded me. I took a deep breath, inhaling the earthy scent of the forest, and felt my muscles relax. This was my happy place, where I could leave the worries of the world behind and simply exist in the moment. Scene 2. But as I ventured deeper into the woods, something felt off. The familiar sights and sounds that had always comforted me now seemed tinged with a sense of unease. The shadows between the trees appeared deeper, the rustling of leaves more ominous. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but the hairs on the back of my neck stood on end, as if I was being watched. I paused, my eyes scanning the undergrowth for any sign of movement. The forest was as still as a graveyard, save for the occasional flutter of a bird's wings or the scurrying of a small creature. Still, the nagging feeling of being observed persisted, and I found myself gripping the strap of my backpack a little tighter. Scene 3. Suddenly, a sharp crack echoed through the woods and I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. It had come from just ahead, off the beaten path, and I couldn't help but wonder what could have caused it. Cautiously, I crept forward, my senses on high alert, searching for the source of the disturbance. As I drew closer, the sounds of my own footsteps seemed to fade, and the forest grew deathly silent. The air felt thick and heavy, as if the very trees were holding their breath in anticipation. I strained my ears, listening for any other sign of movement, but the only thing I could hear was the pounding of my own heart. Scene 4. Then, without warning, a massive figure emerged from the shadows, towering over me like a living nightmare. I gasped in shock, my eyes widening as I took in the creature's towering height, its coarse, matted fur, and the sheer size of its muscular frame. A low, rumbling growl escaped its lips, and I felt a chill run down my spine. Before I could even begin to process what I was seeing, the beast let out a bone-chilling roar that seemed to reverberate through the very earth beneath my feet. It lunged forward, its massive claws slashing through the air with unbridled ferocity, and I barely had time to react. Scene 5. Panic seized me, and I stumbled backwards, my mind racing as I tried to comprehend the sheer terror of the situation. The creature's massive paw connected with my arm, and I cried out in pain as its sharp claws ripped through my flesh. The agony was blinding, and I felt my knees buckle beneath me. I hit the ground hard, my backpack cushioning the impact, but the creature showed no signs of relenting. It loomed over me, its black eyes glaring down with a primal hunger, and I knew that I was completely at its mercy. I tried to crawl away, but the beast was too fast, its powerful strides easily overtaking me. As the creature closed in, I braced myself for the worst, certain that this was the end. But just as it was about to strike again, it suddenly paused, its head turning sharply as if it had detected something in the distance. With a final earth-shaking roar, the massive creature turned and vanished back into the shadows, leaving me bloodied and trembling on the forest floor. I lay there, my heart pounding, too shaken to move. The adrenaline coursing through my veins slowly subsided, replaced by a searing pain that radiated from my wounded arm. I gingerly cradled it against my chest, trying to stem the flow of blood, as the reality of what had just happened began to sink in. I had come face to face with a creature that defied all logic and reason, a being that by all accounts should not exist. And yet, there was no mistaking the terror I had just experienced. The creature's raw power, its animalistic ferocity, and the sheer size of its hulking form were burned into my memory, a trauma that I knew would haunt me long after I had escaped its clutches. As I struggled to my feet, my legs trembling beneath me, I knew that I had to get out of this forest and find help. But the dread of what I had witnessed weighed heavily on my mind, and I couldn't help but wonder if anyone would even believe my story. After all, how could I possibly explain the existence of such a monstrous creature, one that had come so close to taking my life? With a deep breath, I began to make my way towards the edge of the forest, my mind racing with questions and fears about what had just transpired. I knew that I would never be able to return to this place, not after the horrors I had experienced. My heart raced as I stumbled through the dense undergrowth, the creature's heavy footsteps thundering behind me. The once peaceful forest had transformed into a nightmarish labyrinth, every shadow concealing potential danger. I could hear the beast's ragged breathing, growing closer with each passing second. "Help!" I screamed, my voice hoarse and desperate. "Somebody, please help me." But my cries were swallowed by the vastness of the woods, lost in the cacophony of snapping twigs and rustling leaves. I risked a glance over my shoulder and immediately regretted it. The massive, hairy form of the creature was barely 10 yards behind me, its long arms swinging as it easily closed the distance between us. I pushed myself harder, ignoring the burning in my lungs and the sharp pain in my side. Branches whipped across my face, leaving stinging welts, but I couldn't slow down. The beast let out another bone-chilling roar, so close now that I could feel its hot breath on the back of my neck. "No, no, no," I muttered, panic rising in my chest. "This can't be happening." My foot caught on an exposed root and I went sprawling face first into the leaf-covered ground. The impact knocked the wind out of me, and for a moment I lay there, gasping for air. That momentary pause was all the creature needed. A massive fur-covered hand wrapped around my ankle, its grip like iron. I clawed at the earth, desperately trying to find purchase as the beast began to drag me backward. Leaves and twigs scraped against my skin and I could feel my shirt riding up, exposing my back to the cool forest air. "Let me go!" I screamed, kicking wildly with my free leg. But it was like fighting against a force of nature, immovable and relentless. The creature pulled me closer and I rolled onto my back, coming face to face with my pursuer for the first time. Its features were a nightmarish blend of ape and man, with a protruding brow and a mouth full of yellowed teeth. Dark, intelligent eyes stared down at me, filled with a primal hunger that sent shivers down my spine. I raised my arms instinctively, trying to shield myself from the impending attack. The beast's massive hand came down, its claws raking across my forearm. White-hot pain exploded through my body and I screamed in agony. "Please," I whimpered, tears streaming down my face. "Please don't kill me." But if the creature understood my pleas, it showed no sign. It loomed over me, its massive form blocking out what little sunlight filtered through the canopy. I could smell its musty animal odor, a mix of wet fur and something far more feral. In that moment, I was certain I was going to die. Images flashed through my mind. My family, my friends, all the things I'd never get to do or say. I squeezed my eyes shut, bracing for the final, fatal blow, but it never came. Instead, I felt the creature's grip loosen slightly. I cracked open an eye, confused by the sudden reprieve. The beast's head was cocked to the side, as if listening to something in the distance. For a brief moment, hope flickered in my chest. Maybe someone had heard my cries. Maybe help was on the way. That hope was quickly extinguished as the creature's attention snapped back to me. With a grunt that sounded almost annoyed, it began to drag me across the forest floor once more. I thrashed and kicked, trying to break free, but it was like fighting against a freight train. "Where are you taking me?" I shouted, more out of desperation than any expectation of an answer. The beast remained silent, its long strides eating up the ground as it pulled me deeper into the woods. The familiar trails I had hiked countless times before were long gone, replaced by dense underbrush and gnarled trees that seemed to reach out with clawing branches. As we moved, I tried to memorize landmarks, anything that might help me find my way back if I managed to escape. But everything looked the same. An endless sea of green and brown, punctuated only by the occasional boulder or fallen log. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. My arm throbbed where the creature had clawed me, and I could feel warm blood trickling down my skin. The constant dragging had left my back raw and scraped, and every movement sent fresh waves of pain through my body. Finally, the beast came to a stop. It released my ankle, and I scrambled backward, putting as much distance between us as I could. We had arrived at what appeared to be a small clearing, surrounded by towering pines. At the far end, I could see the dark mouth of a cave, half hidden behind a curtain of vines. The creature lumbered toward the cave, pausing at the entrance to turn and look at me. Its eyes seemed to bore into my soul, and I felt a chill run down my spine. Was this its lair? Had it brought me here to finish me off in private? "What do you want from me?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The beast's only response was a low growl that seemed to vibrate through the very air. It took a step toward me, and I instinctively backed away, my hands raised in a futile gesture of defense. "Stay back," I warned, trying to inject some courage into my voice. "I'm warning you." My bravado must have amused the creature because it let out a sound that could almost be mistaken for a chuckle, if it wasn't so terrifying. It advanced on me with surprising speed, closing the distance between us in 2 long strides. Before I could react, its massive hand shot out, grabbing me by the front of my shirt. It lifted me off the ground as if I weighed nothing, bringing my face close to its own. I could see every detail of its features now: the coarse hair, the leathery skin, the yellowed fangs. "Please," I begged, my feet dangling uselessly in the air. "Let me go. I won't tell anyone about you, I swear." The creature's nostrils flared, and for a moment I thought I saw a flicker of something almost human in its eyes. Curiosity, perhaps, or confusion. But then the moment passed, and the primal hunger returned. With a casual flick of its wrist, the beast tossed me to the ground. I hit hard, the impact knocking the wind out of me once again. As I lay there, gasping for air, I heard the creature moving around me. I managed to lift my head just in time to see it picking up a large rock from the forest floor. Terror gripped me as I realized what was about to happen. I tried to crawl away, but my body refused to cooperate. The beast raised the rock high above its head, its muscles rippling beneath its fur. "No!" I screamed, throwing my arms up in a desperate attempt to protect myself. The rock came down with crushing force, and for a moment everything went black. When I opened my eyes again, I was alone in the clearing. The creature was gone, vanished as suddenly as it had appeared. My head throbbed, and when I touched my temple, my fingers came away sticky with blood. Slowly, painfully, I pushed myself to my feet. Every part of my body ached, and I knew I needed medical attention. The beast's vice-like grip tightened around my ankle as it dragged me deeper into the forest. My fingernails dug into the earth, frantically clawing at roots and rocks in a futile attempt to slow our progress. The creature's coarse fur brushed against my skin, sending shivers of revulsion through my battered body. The once familiar woods had transformed into a nightmarish labyrinth, and with each passing moment I felt myself being pulled further from any hope of rescue. "Help!" I screamed, my voice hoarse and barely audible above the creature's heavy breathing. "Somebody please help me!" But my cries were swallowed by the dense foliage, lost in the uncaring wilderness. As we moved deeper into uncharted territory, the forest grew darker and more primeval. Ancient trees loomed overhead, their gnarled branches blocking out what little sunlight remained. The air grew thick with the stench of decay and something else, a musky animal odor that I knew belonged to my captor. Suddenly we broke through a wall of vegetation into a small clearing. My heart sank as I realized this must be the creature's lair. Scattered bones and tufts of fur littered the ground, silent testimonies to previous victims. The beast finally released its grip, and I scrambled away, pressing my back against a moss-covered boulder. For a moment, the creature simply stared at me, its black eyes gleaming with a predatory intelligence that chilled me to my core. I knew I had to act, to fight back somehow, or I would surely die here. Mustering what little strength I had left, I lunged for a nearby branch, hoping to use it as a weapon. But my movements were sluggish, my body weakened by fear and injury. The creature easily anticipated my attack, swatting the branch away with a casual swipe of its massive paw. "No!" I cried out in desperation, my voice cracking. "Stay back!" But my words meant nothing to this primal force of nature. The beast's lips curled back in a snarl, revealing rows of yellowed teeth. With frightening speed, it closed the distance between us. I tried to dodge, to roll away, but the creature's sheer size and strength overpowered me. Its claws raked across my chest, tearing through my shirt and into the flesh beneath. The pain was immediate and intense, like fire spreading across my skin. "God, no!" I screamed, the sound barely human as it tore from my throat. "Please, stop!" But there was no mercy in those cold, dark eyes, no hint of understanding or compassion. This was a creature driven purely by instinct and hunger, and I was nothing more than prey. As I lay helpless on the forest floor, the beast continued its assault. Its sharp claws ripped through my skin with terrifying ease, and I could feel warm blood trickling down my body, soaking into the earth beneath me. Each new wound brought a fresh wave of agony, and I found myself slipping in and out of consciousness, my mind unable to fully process the horror of what was happening. "This can't be real," I muttered, my thoughts growing hazy. "This can't be happening." But the pain was all too real, anchoring me to this nightmarish reality. I could hear the wet sound of tearing flesh, feel the creature's hot breath on my face as it loomed over me. Its guttural growls echoed through the trees, a primordial sound that seemed to shake the very ground. I begged for it to end, for unconsciousness to take me, or for some miraculous rescue to appear. But the creature seemed to relish in my suffering, taking its time as it methodically tore me apart. Each moment stretched into an eternity of pain and terror. "Please," I whimpered, my voice barely a whisper. "Just make it stop." As if in response, the beast let out a deafening roar that reverberated through the clearing. Birds took flight from nearby trees, and small animals scurried for cover. In that moment of distraction, a surge of adrenaline coursed through my body, giving me one last burst of energy. With a strength born of pure desperation, I managed to twist away from the creature's grasp. My hand closed around a jagged rock, and I swung it with all my might, connecting with the beast's snout. It reared back, more surprised than hurt, but it was enough. I scrambled to my feet, ignoring the screaming protest of my battered body. Every movement sent waves of agony through me, but the alternative, staying here to die, was unthinkable. I stumbled away from the clearing, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. Behind me I could hear the creature's angry roars, followed by the sound of pursuit. Branches whipped at my face as I ran, my feet slipping on the uneven ground. I had no idea which direction I was going, driven only by blind panic and the primal urge to survive. "Keep going," I gasped to myself, pushing through the pain. "Don't stop. Don't look back." My lungs burned and my vision blurred, but I forced myself to keep moving. The sounds of pursuit seemed to fade, but I couldn't be sure if the creature had given up or if my own ragged breathing was simply drowning out all other noise. As I fled deeper into the unknown parts of the forest, a small part of my mind wondered if I had merely escaped one death trap for another. But that was a problem for later. For now, all that mattered was putting as much distance as possible between myself and that nightmarish clearing. With each step, I felt my strength ebbing away. Blood loss and exhaustion were taking their toll, and I knew I couldn't keep running forever. But the memory of those cold, merciless eyes and razor-sharp claws drove me onward, deeper into the wilderness. As darkness began to fall, I realized with growing dread that I was hopelessly lost. The familiar trails were far behind me, and I had no idea how to find my way back to civilization. But I couldn't stop. Not yet. Not while that creature might still be out there, hunting me. And so I pressed on, each painful step carrying me further from the beast's lair, but also further from any hope of rescue. The first rays of dawn were breaking through the trees as I stumbled out of the forest. My clothes hung in tatters, stained dark with dried blood. Every step sent waves of pain through my battered body, but the adrenaline coursing through my veins kept me moving. I had to find help, had to tell someone about the monstrous creature that had nearly killed me. As I emerged onto a rural road, I spotted a road sign. "Millbrook, 2 miles," it read. With renewed determination, I set off toward the town, my mind racing with the horrors I had endured. "Someone has to believe me," I muttered, my voice hoarse and barely audible. "They have to." The sun was fully up by the time I reached the outskirts of Millbrook. It was a small, sleepy town, the kind of place where everyone knows everyone else's business. As I limped down the main street, I could feel eyes upon me. Shopkeepers paused in the act of opening their stores. Early morning joggers stopped in their tracks, all staring at the bloodied, wild-eyed stranger in their midst. "Please," I called out, my voice cracking. "I need help. There's something in the forest. A creature." A middle-aged woman approached me cautiously. "Sir, are you all right? Do you need an ambulance?" I grabbed her arm, probably too roughly in my desperation. She flinched, trying to pull away. "You don't understand," I said. "There's a monster out there. It attacked me. We need to warn people." The woman's expression shifted from concern to wariness. She extracted herself from my grip and backed away. "I think you need to calm down, sir. Let's get you some help." More people were gathering now, a mix of curiosity and apprehension on their faces. I could hear their whispers, see the doubt in their eyes. "It's true," I insisted, my voice rising. "It was huge, covered in fur. It tried to kill me. Why won't you believe me?" An older man in a sheriff's uniform pushed through the crowd. "All right, let's settle down here," he said, his hand resting casually on his holster. "Sir, I'm Sheriff Dawson. Why don't you tell me what happened?" I took a deep breath, trying to organize my thoughts. "I was hiking in the forest," I began. "Something attacked me. It was big, bigger than a man, covered in thick, dark fur. It had claws and teeth. It tried to drag me to its lair." As I spoke, I could see the disbelief growing in the sheriff's eyes. When I finished, he exchanged a look with one of his deputies. "Son," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "I think you might be confused. Maybe you had an accident in the woods, hit your head. Why don't we get you checked out at the hospital?" I shook my head vehemently. "No, you're not listening. I know what I saw. It was real. We have to do something before it attacks someone else." The sheriff sighed. "Look, we'll send a patrol out to the area, check things out. But right now, we need to get you some medical attention. You're clearly injured." "But," I started to protest. "No buts," the sheriff interrupted. "Either you go to the hospital voluntarily, or I'll have to insist." Defeated, I allowed myself to be led to a waiting ambulance. As the paramedics began to treat my wounds, I could hear the sheriff talking to his deputy. "Poor guy," he was saying. "Probably got mauled by a bear or something. Mine's trying to make sense of it." "You don't think there could be any truth to his story?" the deputy asked. The sheriff chuckled. "Bigfoot? In our woods? Not likely. Nah, he's either confused or looking for attention. We'll do a sweep of the area, but I bet we don't find anything." I wanted to scream, to make them understand the danger that was lurking in their forest. But as the adrenaline began to wear off, exhaustion took hold. The last thing I remember before passing out was the ambulance doors closing, shutting me off from the disbelieving stares of the townspeople. When I woke up, I was in a hospital bed. My wounds had been cleaned and bandaged, and an IV drip was attached to my arm. For a moment, I hoped it had all been a terrible nightmare, but the pain in my body and the vivid memories of the attack were all too real. A doctor came in, clipboard in hand. "Ah, you're awake," he said. "How are you feeling?" "Like I was mauled by a monster," I replied bitterly. The doctor's expression became carefully neutral. "Yes, well, you've sustained some significant injuries. Lacerations, contusions, possible concussion. Can you tell me what happened?" I hesitated. I knew how it would sound, but I couldn't stay silent. "There's something in the forest," I said. "A creature, like nothing I've ever seen before. It attacked me." The doctor nodded, making a note on his clipboard. "I see. And can you describe this creature?" As I recounted my experience, I could see the skepticism growing in the doctor's eyes. When I finished, he cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Well," he said, "trauma can sometimes cause our minds to interpret events in unusual ways. The important thing is that you're safe now and on the road to recovery." "You don't believe me either," I said flatly. The doctor patted my arm in what he probably thought was a comforting gesture. "Why don't you get some rest? We'll talk more later." As he left, I could hear him speaking to someone outside. "Possible psychotic episode. May need psychiatric evaluation." I lay back in the bed, staring at the ceiling. The creature's roar echoed in my memory. Its savage eyes burned into my mind. But without evidence, without proof, I was just another crazy person with a wild story. As night fell, I found myself unable to sleep. Every shadow seemed to hide a monstrous form, every sound outside my window a potential growl. I was safe, surrounded by people, and yet I had never felt more alone. The creature was still out there, I was sure of it, waiting in the darkness of the forest, ready to strike again. And no one believed me. No one would be prepared when it decided to attack once more. As I lay there, grappling with the weight of my knowledge and the futility of my warnings, I realized that this was far from over. The encounter in the forest had changed me forever, and I knew that I could never truly rest until someone believed my story. But how could I convince them when I had nothing but my word and my wounds to show for my ordeal? With these thoughts swirling in my mind, I drifted into an uneasy sleep, haunted by nightmares of glowing eyes and savage claws, and the terrifying knowledge that somewhere out there, a monster was waiting. The days following my release from the hospital blurred together in a haze of pain and paranoia. My body was healing, but my mind remained trapped in that terrifying moment when I first laid eyes on the creature. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw its massive form looming over me, those glowing eyes filled with primal hunger. Sleep became my enemy. Each night, I'd jolt awake, drenched in sweat, the echo of the beast's roar still ringing in my ears. During the day, I'd catch myself staring out the window, scanning the tree line for any sign of movement. The rational part of my brain knew the creature was unlikely to venture this close to town, but fear isn't rational. "You're safe now," my sister Sarah would say, her voice laced with concern. She'd come to stay with me after the incident, worried about my state of mind. "It was probably just a bear, Ethan. The doctor said you might have been hallucinating from the trauma." I wanted to believe her, to accept the comforting lie, but I couldn't shake the memory of what I'd seen. "It wasn't a bear, Sarah," I'd insist, my voice trembling. "I know what I saw. It was something else." She'd give me that look, a mixture of pity and worry, before changing the subject. I could tell she thought I was losing it, and maybe I was. As the days passed, a nagging doubt began to creep into my mind. What if they were right? What if it had all been a hallucination, a trick of my oxygen-deprived brain as I lay bleeding in the forest? The uncertainty was almost worse than the fear. I knew there was only one way to quiet the doubts. I had to go back. The decision to return to the forest came suddenly, born of equal parts desperation and determination. I needed proof, something tangible to validate my experience and silence the whispers of madness that haunted me. Sarah tried to talk me out of it. "This is crazy, Ethan," she pleaded as I laced up my hiking boots. "You're not fully healed. What if you get hurt again?" I met her gaze, seeing the fear in her eyes. "I have to do this, Sarah. I need to know it was real." She shook her head, resigned. "At least let me come with you." "No," I said firmly. "I need to do this alone." The forest looked different in the harsh light of day. The towering trees that had once seemed so welcoming now loomed ominously, their shadows concealing potential threats. Every snapping twig, every rustle of leaves sent my heart racing. I retraced my steps from that fateful day, my eyes scanning the ground for any sign of the creature's passage. The further I went, the more my doubts grew. Everything looked so normal. Then I saw it, a section of underbrush that had been trampled, the vegetation crushed as if by something large. My breath caught in my throat as I approached. There, in the soft earth, were deep gouges, claw marks far too large to belong to any known animal in these woods. "I knew it," I whispered, a mix of vindication and terror washing over me. It was real. But as I knelt to examine the marks more closely, I realized they were already starting to fade. Rain and wind had begun to erase the evidence, and I knew that in a few more days there would be nothing left to see. I spent hours combing the area, searching for anything else that might corroborate my story. A tuft of fur, a footprint, anything. But there was nothing. It was as if the creature had vanished into thin air, leaving only these fading marks and my traumatic memories as proof of its existence. As the sun began to set, I reluctantly made my way back home. Sarah was waiting on the porch, her face a mask of worry. "Did you find what you were looking for?" she asked as I approached. I hesitated, unsure how to answer. I don't know," I finally admitted. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I found myself questioning everything. The marks I'd found seemed so clear, so undeniable. But was it enough? Would anyone believe me based on some gouges in the earth that were already disappearing? For the first time since the attack, I allowed myself to consider the possibility that maybe, just maybe, I had imagined it all. The thought was both terrifying and oddly comforting. If it wasn't real, then I was safe. But if it wasn't real, then what did that say about my sanity? Sleep eluded me as I grappled with these thoughts. Every creak of the house, Every gust of wind outside my window sent a jolt of adrenaline through my system. I found myself straining to hear, half expecting to hear the creature's roar in the distance. As dawn broke, I realized with a heavy heart that I could never look at the forest the same way again. The peaceful sanctuary I had once loved was now tainted, forever associated with the terror I had experienced. I stood at my window, gazing out at the tree line. The morning mist hung low, giving the forest an ethereal, almost otherworldly appearance. It was beautiful, in a haunting sort of way, but I could no longer appreciate its tranquility. I can't stay here, I murmured to myself, the decision crystallizing in my mind. The constant reminders, the proximity to where it all happened. It was too much. Sarah found me packing a suitcase when she came to check on me later that morning. "Ethan, what are you doing?" she asked, confusion evident in her voice. I paused, a shirt half folded in my hands. "I can't stay here, Sarah. Every time I look at those trees, I see it. I feel its claws, hear its roar. I need to get away." She nodded slowly, understanding dawning in her eyes. "Where will you go?" "I don't know," I admitted. "Somewhere without forests, somewhere I can try to forget." As I zipped up the suitcase, I knew that forgetting wasn't really an option. The memory of the creature, real or imagined, would stay with me forever. But maybe, just maybe, with some distance, I could learn to live with it. I cast one last look out the window at the forest that had once been my refuge. Somewhere in those woods, a mystery remained unsolved. But for now, at least, it would have to stay that way. I had my own demons to face, my own path to recovery to navigate. And that journey was leading me far away from here. With a heavy heart, but a determined spirit, I picked up my suitcase. The physical wounds had mostly healed, leaving behind a patchwork of scars that mapped the creature's savage assault across my body. But the emotional trauma lingered, a constant companion that colored every aspect of my life. Nights were the worst, filled with vivid nightmares that left me drenched in sweat, heart pounding as if I were back in that forest clearing. I tried to resume my normal routines, desperate for some semblance of normalcy, but even the most mundane tasks were now fraught with anxiety. A trip to the grocery store became an ordeal, my eyes constantly scanning for danger, flinching at every unexpected movement or sound. One morning, as I stood in my kitchen staring blankly at the coffee maker, my roommate Jake's voice startled me out of my reverie. "Ethan, you okay, man?" he asked, concern etched on his face. "You've been standing there for like 10 minutes. I blinked, trying to focus. "Yeah, I'm fine. Just thinking." Jake sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Look, I know you went through something rough out there in the woods, but don't you think it's time to maybe talk to someone? A professional, I mean." His words stung, even though I knew they came from a place of genuine concern. "I'm not crazy, Jake," I snapped, more harshly than I intended. "I know what I saw." "I didn't say you were crazy," he replied, holding up his hands defensively. "I just think you might need some help processing what happened. That's all." I mumbled an apology and retreated to my room, Jake's words echoing in my head. Maybe he was right. Maybe I did need help. But first I needed answers. Driven by an obsessive need to validate my experience, I spent countless hours online, searching for any reports of similar incidents. I scoured local news sites, paranormal forums, and wildlife databases, hoping to find something, anything, that might corroborate my story. But the results were frustratingly sparse. There were plenty of Bigfoot sightings, sure, but nothing that matched the violent, terrifying creature I had encountered. Most reports described a shy, elusive being, not the savage monster that had nearly killed me. Late one night, bleary-eyed from hours of fruitless searching, I came across a forum for cryptozoology enthusiasts. With trembling fingers, I typed out my story, hoping that someone in this community might have insight or similar experiences to share. The responses came quickly, but they weren't what I had hoped for. Sounds like you had a run-in with a grizzly, buddy. No Bigfoot would act that aggressive. Nice creative writing exercise, but you might want to work on making it more believable. Another attention seeker trying to cash in on the Bigfoot craze. Yawn. I slammed my laptop shut, frustration and despair washing over me. Why wouldn't anyone believe me? Desperate for validation, I decided to reach out to experts directly. I found contact information for local wildlife biologists and even a few renowned cryptozoologists. Surely they would take my account seriously. Dr. Emily Hartwell, a wildlife biologist at the nearby university, agreed to meet with me. As I sat in her office, recounting my experience, I could see the skepticism growing in her eyes. "Mr. Thompson," she said gently when I finished, "while I don't doubt that you experienced something traumatic, I'm afraid what you're describing simply isn't possible. There's no known animal in this region that matches your description." "But I know what I saw," I insisted, my voice cracking with emotion. "It wasn't a bear or a mountain lion, it was something else." Dr. Hartwell leaned forward, her expression sympathetic but firm. "Our minds can play tricks on us in high-stress situations. It's possible that in the chaos and fear of the attack, your brain constructed this image of a monster to make sense of what was happening." I left her office feeling deflated, her words echoing Jake's suggestion of seeking professional help. Was I really losing my mind? My last hope was Dr. Marcus Blackwood, a cryptozoologist known for his open-minded approach to Bigfoot research. But even he seemed skeptical of my account. "I've been studying Bigfoot reports for over 30 years, he told me over the phone, his voice gruff but not unkind. "And I've never heard of one behaving as aggressively as you describe. Are you sure it wasn't some other animal? Perhaps a bear that you misidentified in the heat of the moment?" "I know the difference between a bear and what attacked me," I said, trying to keep the frustration out of my voice. This was something unnatural, something that shouldn't exist. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Son," Dr. Blackwood finally said, "I think you might want to consider talking to someone about what you experienced. Not all scars are physical, you know." As I hung up the phone, a wave of isolation washed over me. No one believed me. No one could understand what I had been through. I was alone with my memories, my fears, and my doubts. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I found myself questioning everything. Had I really seen what I thought I saw? Or was my mind playing tricks on me, as Dr. Hartwell suggested? The memory of the attack felt so vivid, so real. But so did my nightmares, which had begun to blend with reality in confusing and terrifying ways. What if it was all just a dream? I whispered into the darkness, the words tasting bitter on my tongue. But if it was a dream, why did my body bear the scars of the attack? Why did I wake up in cold sweats, the creature's roar still echoing in my ears? And if it wasn't real, what did that say about my sanity? As dawn broke, casting long shadows across my room, I realized I was at a crossroads. I could continue this obsessive search for validation, potentially losing myself in the process. Or I could try to move on, to rebuild my life and find a way to live with the uncertainty. But how could I move on when the memory of those glowing eyes and razor-sharp claws still haunted my every waking moment? How could I ever feel safe again, knowing that something like that might be out there? As I got up to face another day, I knew one thing for certain. Real or not, the creature had changed me forever, and I had to find a way to live with that change, or risk losing myself completely to the shadows of doubt and fear that now clouded my mind. Little did I know, as I prepared for another day of grappling with my memories and doubts, that my encounter with the unknown was far from over. The beast that had haunted my nightmares was about to become all too real once again, challenging everything I thought I knew about reality and my own sanity. The night was oppressively still, the kind of quiet that seems to amplify every small sound. I lay in bed, eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling as sleep eluded me once again. The digital clock on my nightstand read 2:37 a.m., its red numbers a stark reminder of another sleepless night. Suddenly, a sound pierced the silence. A sharp crack, like a branch snapping under immense weight. My body went rigid, every muscle tensing as if preparing for fight or flight. It couldn't be. Not here, not now. I held my breath, straining my ears to catch any further noise. For several long moments, there was nothing but the pounding of my own heart. Then another crack, louder this time and unmistakably closer. "No, no, no," I whispered, my voice trembling. "This isn't real. It can't be real." But deep down, I knew. The sound was all too familiar, bringing back a flood of memories I'd been trying desperately to suppress. The forest, the chase, the terror, it all came rushing back in vivid detail. I slowly sat up, my eyes darting to the window. The curtains were drawn, but I could see the faint outline of trees swaying in the moonlight. My house sat on the edge of town, backing up to a small wooded area. It wasn't the same forest where I'd had my encounter, but in that moment, every tree seemed like a potential hiding place for the creature. As if responding to my thoughts, a thunderous roar shattered the night. It was a sound that defied description, part animal, part something else entirely. A sound that shouldn't exist in this world. A sound I'd hoped never to hear again. "Oh God," I gasped, stumbling out of bed. My legs felt weak, threatening to give out beneath me. It's here. It's really here. The logical part of my brain screamed that this was impossible. The creature I'd encountered was miles away, in a different forest. It couldn't have followed me here. But logic had no place in this moment of pure primal fear. I fumbled for the light switch, my trembling fingers missing it several times before finally flooding the room with harsh light. The sudden brightness made me squint, but I didn't dare turn it off. Darkness was the creature's domain, and I needed every advantage I could get. "Think, Ethan. Think," I muttered to myself, trying to force my panic-stricken mind to formulate a plan. "You need a weapon, something to defend yourself." My eyes landed on a baseball bat in the corner of the room, a relic from my high school days. It seemed woefully inadequate against the memory of the creature's massive bulk and razor-sharp claws, but it was better than nothing. As I moved to grab the bat, another roar echoed through the night, closer this time. So close that I could feel the vibrations in my chest. My hand closed around the bat's handle, the smooth wood cool against my sweaty palm. "Come on," I whispered, more to myself than to the unseen threat outside. "You survived once. You can do it again." But even as I tried to bolster my courage, doubt gnawed at me. Last time I'd barely escaped with my life, and that was in broad daylight, in familiar territory. Here, in the dead of night, with the creature potentially right outside my window. The odds seemed impossibly stacked against me. A heavy thud from outside made me jump. It sounded like something large had landed on the ground, or climbed down from a tree. The image of the creature's massive form dropping from the branches flashed through my mind, and I had to stifle a whimper. I crept towards the window, bat raised, ready to swing at the slightest provocation. With my free hand, I reached for the curtain, fingers trembling as they grasped the fabric. "You can do this," I breathed, trying to steady my nerves. "You have to do this." In one swift motion, I yanked the curtain aside, half expecting to see the creature's terrifying visage pressed against the glass. But there was nothing there, just the dark outlines of trees and bushes, swaying gently in the night breeze. For a moment, I allowed myself to hope. Maybe it had all been in my head, a vivid hallucination brought on by stress and lack of sleep. But then I saw it, a shadow moving between the trees, larger than any animal that should be in these woods, moving with a purpose that sent chills down my spine. The creature stepped into a patch of moonlight, and I felt my breath catch in my throat. It was exactly as I remembered, impossibly tall, covered in thick matted fur. Its eyes seemed to glow in the darkness, fixed directly on my window, on me. Our gazes locked, and in that moment I knew with absolute certainty that this was no dream, no hallucination. The creature was real, and it had come for me. A low growl rumbled through the air, and the beast took a step towards the house. My grip tightened on the bat, knuckles turning white with the force of it. I knew the flimsy glass of the window wouldn't stop the creature if it decided to attack. I was trapped, cornered in my own home. "Stay back!" I shouted, my voice cracking with fear. But the words seemed to have no effect on the advancing monster. As the creature drew closer, its massive form blocking out the moonlight, I steeled myself for what was to come. I didn't know if I could survive another encounter, if I had the strength to fend off this impossible beast once again. But I knew I had to try. Because even if I survived, even if I managed to drive the creature away, I knew that no one would believe me. I'd be left alone with my trauma once again, trying to convince a skeptical world of the horrors that lurked in the shadows. But none of that mattered now. All that mattered was survival. As the creature's hot breath fogged the window, as its claws scraped against the glass, I raised the bat and prepared for the fight of my life. "Come on, then," I growled, surprising myself with the steel in my voice. "Let's finish this." The window exploded inward in a shower of glass, and the creature burst through, its massive form filling the room. I stumbled backwards, my grip on the baseball bat tightening until my knuckles turned white. The beast's eyes gleamed with a primal hunger that chilled me to my core. "Stay back," I shouted, my voice cracking with fear. But my words were drowned out by a deafening roar that shook the very walls of the house. I didn't wait to see what it would do next. Survival instinct kicked in, and I bolted for the door. My trembling fingers fumbled with the knob, precious seconds ticking by as I struggled to open it. Finally it gave way, and I sprinted down the hallway. The sound of splintering wood and shattering objects told me the creature was in pursuit. Its heavy footfalls echoed behind me, growing closer with each passing moment. I knew I couldn't outrun it. Its powerful legs would easily overtake me. But I had to try. I burst out of the front door and into the cool night air. The moon cast long shadows across the yard, turning familiar objects into looming monstrous shapes. For a split second I hesitated, unsure which direction to run. That moment of indecision cost me dearly. A massive paw slammed into my back, sending me sprawling across the damp grass. I rolled, gasping for air, and found myself staring up at the towering form of the creature. Its fur was matted and tangled, its breath hot and rank. Those eyes, those terrible glowing eyes, bore into me with an intelligence that seemed impossible for a mere animal. "Please," I whimpered, knowing it was futile but unable to stop myself. "Please don't." The creature's response was a low, rumbling growl that vibrated through my entire body. I scrambled backwards, my hands scrabbling in the dirt for anything I could use as a weapon. My fingers closed around a rock, and I hurled it with all my might at the beast's face. It connected with a dull thud, but the creature barely flinched. If anything, it seemed to grow angrier, its massive claws flexing as it advanced on me. I tried to get to my feet, to run again, but my legs felt like lead. Fear had paralyzed me, leaving me cornered and helpless as the creature closed in. Its claws were poised to strike, gleaming wickedly in the moonlight. "Help!" I screamed, my voice echoing in the still night air. "Somebody, please, help me!" But I knew it was useless. My nearest neighbors were too far away to hear, and even if they did, who would believe that a monster was attacking me in my own front yard? The first blow came swiftly, the creature's sharp talons tearing into my shoulder. The pain was immediate and intense, unlike anything I'd ever experienced. I cried out in agony, my vision blurring with tears. "Stop!" I pleaded, my voice raw and desperate. "Oh God, please stop!" But the creature showed no mercy, no hint of understanding. Its assault continued relentlessly, claws raking across my chest and arms. Each new wound brought a fresh wave of pain, and I found myself slipping in and out of consciousness. The world around me faded in and out of focus. One moment, I was acutely aware of every sensation, the creature's hot breath on my face, the searing pain of its claws, the damp grass beneath me. The next, everything would become hazy and distant, as if I was watching the scene unfold from far away. Through it all, the forest remained eerily silent. There were no sounds of birds or small animals, no rustling of leaves in the wind. It was as if nature itself was holding its breath, bearing witness to this impossible encounter. The only sounds were the creature's guttural growls and my own desperate cries. Each time I thought the pain couldn't get any worse, the beast would prove me wrong. Its claws seemed to find every vulnerable spot, tearing through skin and muscle with terrifying ease. "Why?" I gasped between sobs. "Why are you doing this?" But of course there was no answer. The creature's eyes held no empathy, no understanding. They were the eyes of a predator, focused solely on its prey. As the assault continued, I found myself growing weaker. The pain began to dull, replaced by a creeping numbness that I knew was dangerous. Part of me wanted to give in to it, to let the darkness take me and end this nightmare. But another part, a stubborn, primal part, refused to give up. It screamed at me to fight to survive even in the face of this impossible horror. With the last of my strength, I lashed out, my fist connecting with the creature's snout. It wasn't much, probably hurt me more than it hurt the beast, but it was enough to make it pause. In that moment of hesitation, I heard something that made my heart leap, the distant sound of a car engine. Someone was coming down the road. The creature heard it too. Its head snapped up, ears twitching as it listened. For a moment it seemed torn between finishing me off and fleeing. "Help!" I croaked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Over here!" The sound of the approaching vehicle grew louder, and suddenly, a pair of headlights swept across the yard. The creature let out a frustrated roar, but the prospect of discovery seemed to outweigh its bloodlust. With one last, baleful glare at me, it turned and loped off into the darkness of the surrounding woods. Its massive form melted into the shadows with surprising speed, leaving me battered and bleeding on the ground. As the car pulled into my driveway, its headlights illuminating the scene of devastation, I felt a mix of relief and dread. I was alive, barely, but I knew that my ordeal was far from over, because even as I lay there, waiting for help to arrive, I could see the doubt and disbelief that would greet my story. Who would believe that a monster had attacked me in my own front yard? Who would accept the existence of a creature that defied all scientific explanation? As consciousness began to slip away, I clung to one thought. I had survived. Again. But at what cost? And what would happen when the sun rose and I had to face a world that would never understand the horror I had endured? The last thing I heard before darkness took me was the sound of car doors slamming and voices raised in alarm. The creature's claws raked across my back as I twisted away, pain searing through my body. By some miracle, I managed to slip from its grasp, my torn shirt hanging in shreds. Blood trickled down my skin, but the adrenaline coursing through my veins dulled the pain. I knew I couldn't afford to stop, couldn't let the shock set in. Not if I wanted to survive. I stumbled forward, my legs trembling beneath me. The forest was a blur of shadows and moonlight, branches whipping at my face as I ran. Behind me I could hear the heavy footfalls of the creature, each thud sending tremors through the ground. Its hot, fetid breath seemed to ghost across the back of my neck, spurring me on despite the protestations of my battered body. "Keep going," I gasped to myself, the words barely audible over my ragged breathing. "Don't stop. Don't look back." But the temptation to glance over my shoulder was overwhelming. As I ducked under a low-hanging branch, I risked a quick look. The sight nearly stopped my heart. The creature was closer than I'd thought, its massive form easily navigating the forest terrain. Its eyes gleamed with predatory focus, fixed solely on me. I pushed myself harder, ignoring the burning in my lungs and the stabbing pain in my side. My foot caught on an exposed root, and I stumbled, nearly falling. The momentary loss of speed allowed the creature to gain ground, and I could feel the rush of air as its claws swiped at me, missing by mere inches. "No!" I cried out, more in defiance than fear. "Not like this." The trees began to thin out, and I could see glimpses of open space ahead. the edge of the forest. Hope surged within me, giving me a second wind. If I could just make it to the road, to civilization, maybe I'd have a chance. As I burst out of the tree line, the distant lights of the town came into view. They seemed impossibly far away, twinkling like stars on the horizon. But they were real, tangible proof that safety existed beyond this nightmare. I dared another glance behind me. The creature had paused at the forest's edge, its massive form a terrifying silhouette against the darkness. For a moment I thought it might retreat, unwilling to venture into the open. But then it let out a bone-chilling roar and surged forward. "Help!" I screamed, my voice hoarse and desperate. "Somebody, please!" The road stretched out before me, a ribbon of asphalt cutting through the wilderness. I waved my arms frantically as I ran, hoping to catch the attention of any passing vehicles. My heart leapt as I saw headlights approaching in the distance. "Here! Over here!" I shouted, stumbling towards the oncoming car. But as the vehicle drew closer, I realized with growing horror that it wasn't slowing down. I locked eyes with the driver for a split second, saw the look of confusion and alarm on their face. Then they were gone, speeding past me without so much as tapping the brakes. "No, wait!" I cried out, but it was useless. The car's taillights receded into the distance, leaving me alone once more. Another set of headlights appeared, and I redoubled my efforts to flag them down. But like the first, this car sped past without stopping, as did the next, and the next after that. "Please," I sobbed, my energy flagging. "Why won't anyone help me?" But I knew why. In the darkness, covered in blood and dirt, I must have looked like a madman. The drivers probably thought I was drunk or on drugs or simply insane. They had no way of knowing the danger I was in, the horror that pursued me. I could hear the creature getting closer, its heavy breathing mixing with my own labored gasps. My legs felt like lead, each step a monumental effort. I knew I couldn't keep running much longer. With a final desperate surge, I sprinted towards the center of the road. If I couldn't get a car to stop, maybe I could at least force them to slow down. But as I reached the yellow line, my strength finally gave out. My legs buckled beneath me and I collapsed to the asphalt. The creature's roar filled the air, triumphant and terrifying. I rolled onto my back, prepared to face my end with my eyes open. But to my surprise, the beast had stopped at the edge of the road. It paced back and forth, growling and snapping its jaws, but seemed unwilling to step onto the pavement. For a long moment, we stared at each other across that small stretch of road. Its eyes burned with inhuman intelligence and barely contained rage. Then, with a final, frustrated roar, it turned and loped back into the forest. Within seconds, its massive form had melted into the shadows, leaving no trace of its existence. I lay there on the cold asphalt, my body racked with pain and exhaustion. Cars continued to pass by, their drivers oblivious to the life and death struggle that had just played out. As the adrenaline faded, the full extent of my injuries began to make themselves known. I knew I needed medical attention, but the thought of trying to explain what had happened filled me with dread. Who would believe me? Who would accept that a creature out of legend had attacked me, not once but twice? As I slowly, painfully pulled myself to my feet, I realized that my ordeal was far from over. The physical wounds would heal, but convincing others of the truth, and coming to terms with it myself, would be a battle all its own. With one last look at the dark forest behind me, I began the long, painful walk towards town. Each step was an agony, but each one also took me further from the nightmare I had endured. As the first light of dawn began to paint the sky, I steeled myself for what was to come. I had survived the impossible, but now I faced a different kind of challenge, making sense of a world where such horrors could exist, and finding a way to live with the knowledge that they did. The harsh, fluorescent lights of the police station buzzed overhead as I sat in the hard plastic chair, my hands trembling slightly as I recounted my story for what felt like the 100th time. Detective Sarah Lawson sat across from me, her expression a careful mask of neutrality as she jotted down notes. "So, Mr. Thompson," she said, her tone measured, "you're saying this creature attacked you in your own front yard?" I nodded emphatically. Yes, that's right. It came through my bedroom window and chased me outside. I know how it sounds, but I swear to you, it's the truth. Detective Lawson leaned back in her chair, tapping her pen against her notepad. And you described this creature as being over 8 feet tall, covered in fur, with glowing eyes. I know it sounds crazy, I said, my voice cracking slightly. But I know what I saw, what I experienced. The pain was real, Detective. The fear was real. She sighed, closing her notepad. Mr. Thompson, we've thoroughly investigated the area around your house. There's no evidence of any large animal activity, let alone a creature matching your description. The damage to your home is consistent with vandalism, not an animal attack. I felt a wave of frustration wash over me. But my injuries are consistent with a fall, she interrupted gently, possibly exacerbated by your previous incident in the woods. Mr. Thompson, have you considered speaking with a therapist? Trauma can manifest in unexpected ways, and I'm not crazy, I snapped, immediately regretting my outburst. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself. I'm sorry, it's just, I know what happened to me. Why won't anyone believe me? Detective Lawson's expression softened slightly. We're not dismissing your experience, Mr. Thompson. We simply have to follow the evidence, and right now there's no evidence to support your claims. As I left the police station, the weight of disbelief settled heavily on my shoulders. I knew I wasn't imagining things, but how could I prove it? The following day, against my better judgment, I found myself driving back to the forest where my nightmare had begun. I parked at the trailhead, my heart racing as I stepped out of the car. The woods looked deceptively peaceful in the morning light, birds chirping and a gentle breeze rustling the leaves. You can do this, I muttered to myself, taking a deep breath before starting down the trail. Every snapping twig, every rustle in the underbrush made me jump. I scanned the forest floor, desperate for any sign of the creature's passage. After hours of searching, I finally spotted something that made my breath catch in my throat. A massive footprint pressed into a patch of soft earth. I knelt down, my hand hovering over the impression. It was easily twice the size of my own foot, with clear toe marks and a depth that suggested immense weight. This was it. Proof that I wasn't crazy. Excitedly, I pulled out my phone to take a picture, but as I framed the shot, my heart sank. The footprint, so clear to my naked eye, barely showed up on the screen. The soft light filtering through the trees cast shadows that obscured the details, making it look like nothing more than a random depression in the dirt. No, 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 I whispered, trying different angles, different lighting, anything to make the print show up clearly. But it was useless. Without a proper cast or measurement tools, this faint impression would never be enough to convince anyone. As the sun began to set, I trudged back to my car, feeling defeated. The memory of the attack was still vivid in my mind, but without evidence, it would remain just that, a memory that no one else would ever believe. Weeks turned into months, and slowly, life began to return to a semblance of normalcy. I went back to work, tried to reconnect with friends, but there was always a part of me that remained on edge, waiting for the other shoe to drop. One evening, as I sat on my newly repaired porch, nursing a beer and watching the sun set over the distant tree line, my neighbor Tom walked over. "Evening, Ethan," he called out, leaning against the railing. "How you holding up?" I managed a weak smile. "I'm all right, Tom. Thanks for asking." He nodded, his expression thoughtful. "You know, I've been meaning to talk to you about something. That night when all that commotion happened at your place." My heart skipped a beat. Had he seen something? "Yeah?" I prompted, trying to keep my voice steady. Tom scratched his head, looking uncomfortable. "Well, I could have sworn I heard something. Big out there. Like really big. And there was this smell, like wet dog but worse. I didn't say anything to the cops, 'cause, well, it sounds pretty crazy, doesn't it?" For a moment, I couldn't speak. Here, finally, was someone who had experienced something who might believe me, but as I opened my mouth to share my story, I hesitated. The memory of all the disbelief, the skeptical looks, the not-so-subtle suggestions that I might be losing my mind came flooding back. "Yeah," I said finally, forcing a chuckle. "Pretty crazy. Must have been the wind playing tricks, huh?" Tom nodded, looking relieved. "Yeah, must have been. Well, good to see you're doing better, Ethan. Take care." As he walked away, I felt a mix of relief and regret wash over me. Part of me wanted to call him back, to tell him everything. But a larger part knew that the truth would only burden him with the same doubts and fears that plagued me. I turned back to the forest, now cast in deep shadows as night fell. Somewhere out there, I knew, the creature still roamed. My encounter had been real, the danger very much alive. But it was a reality I would have to carry alone, a secret locked away in my memory, as vivid and terrifying as the day it happened. As I stood to go inside, I cast one last glance at the darkening woods. For a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of movement among the trees, a pair of eyes glinting in the fading light. But I blinked, and it was gone, leaving me alone with my thoughts and the weight of a truth that no one else would ever believe.